Mom, take a blanket down to the storage room. We have guests tonight. Don't embarrass us. My son said it without looking at me. His tone as harsh as if he were ordering a maid. His wife stood by the kitchen counter, arms folded, adding one more cut. That room is big enough for one old lady. I went numb in the upscale apartment I'd bought with my husband's life insurance, the place that had once been our shared dream. A peaceful home where you can live in safety. But now, my son had turned it into a stage to humiliate his own mother. I didn't cry. I set my teacup down, looked him straight in the eyes, and said quietly, "All right." When the basement door clicked shut, I opened the lid of a small metal box hidden behind the storage bins. Inside were a camera, a copy of the condo contract, and a USB recorder. Tonight they thought they'd pushed me to the bottom of the house, but this is exactly where I would start climbing back to the top of my life. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Audrey Whitmore, 67, widowed for almost 2 years. I spent my life as a bookkeeping secretary at a small insurance company in Charlotte. Careful, quiet work, just like me. I'm not wealthy, but I get by. I'm not fearless, but I'm steady enough to withstand life's stormy seasons. I have one son, Brandon, the person I once believed was the last bright part of my world after my husband died. I used to think I was a good mother, a fortunate woman with a family. But today, standing in the apartment I bought with my husband's life insurance and hearing my son tell me to sleep in the storage room, I realized this. Sometimes you don't truly know who you are until your own blood tests your dignity. After Gil, my husband, passed, the house we'd lived in for 35 years turned cold, like a museum of memories. Every morning, I still brewed 2 cups of coffee, then remembered there was only one person left to drink. Every evening, the empty, wooden chair at the table reminded me that the only person who ever looked at me with gratitude was gone for good. I'm 67. At this age, people learn to slow down, but loneliness never does. It threads through every breath. 3 months after the funeral, Gil's lawyer called. He had left me $600,000 in life insurance, an amount I could barely imagine. Gil had kept it quiet, maybe so I wouldn't worry. I cried, but they were the first warm tears I'd shed in months. I thought, maybe he was still trying to protect me, even from far away. I spent weeks thinking. Then one March morning, I stood before a map of North Carolina and set my hand on Charlotte, the city where we dreamed of living in retirement. I remembered what Gil always said. A small condo near downtown, a balcony with night lights. When we're older, all you need is a place to sit and breathe free. I smiled and whispered to his photo, "All right, I'll do it for both of them. Us." 3 weeks later, I signed for a 2-bedroom condo in a new building in South End, quiet but close enough to downtown. Price: $400,000, including access to a pool, a gym, a private parking space, and a roomy storage area in the basement. I had $200,000 left, enough for upgrades and a cushion for old age. On key day, my hands shook. Sunlight poured into the rooms at noon, and I felt as if Gil were standing there, smiling gently. "Well done, Audrey. You finally did what you deserve." I picked every item myself: cream curtains, a brown fabric sofa, a vase of lavender. Everything in that condo held a piece of our memories. I called my son, excited. "Brandon, I've got great news. I just bought a new condo." "You and Tessa will love it." Silence for a few seconds, then his voice strange and cold. "With Dad's insurance money, right?" I hesitated. "Yes, Gil. Left it for me." "And you spent $400,000 on that?" "Yes, but there's still $200,000 for a scamly." He cut me off. "Did you ever think to ask me first?" "Ask you?" "This was your father's money. He left it to me." A hard breath on the other end, then a hang-up. I stood there listening to the long tone in a kitchen that still smelled of fresh paint. It felt like I'd lost something deeper than money, the little boy who once held my hand on his first day of school. 3 days later, the phone rang while I was arranging the living room. Brandon. His voice sounded softer, but there was something false in the sweetness. "Are you home this weekend, Mom?" "Yes, are you coming by?" "Yeah." Tessa wants to bring her parents and a few friends to see the place. They want to tour it. "And you can stay, but there's one thing." "What thing?" I asked. "Could you move down to the storage room in the basement for a few days?" I thought I misheard. "The storage room? Are you joking?" "No, Mom, just a few days. The condo feels smaller than the photos. Tessa doesn't want guests to see you living with us. They might think we can't afford to take care of you." I went numb. "Are you afraid people will think I'm poor?" Brandon lowered his voice. "I just need you to be reasonable. Don't let anyone see that you're old and still, clinging to us." I sat down, gripping the phone. "Brandon, this is my place. I bought it with the money your father left." He paused, then spoke slowly. "Exactly. It was my father's money, and I'm the legal heir. Don't forget that." He hung up. That night I sat alone in a home that still smelled of new wood, feeling both hurt and hollow. I had lost my husband, and now I might be losing my son. But instead of crying, I turned on the lamp and opened a notebook. I wrote one line: "No one gets to steal your dignity, not even your own child." The next morning, I started moving. I bought a mini camera and hid it behind a vase on the TV console, connected to my phone. I photographed every document, purchase contract, bank transfers, and saved them to the cloud. I was no longer the woman who bowed her head for fear of losing family. I understood now. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd use my head, not my tears. That afternoon, Tessa texted, "Please don't go on about the price. My parents think the condo's about $650,000. Just say that it sounds better. Thanks in advance." I looked at the message, my heart stinging even as a smile formed. I took a screenshot, evidence number 2. They seemed to have forgotten I'd been a bookkeeping secretary for more than 30 years. I understand the value of paperwork and how to use it when it counts. 2 days before they arrived, I did what Brandon asked. I tidied the basement storage room. It was small, with bare concrete walls and weak yellow light, but clean. There was an outlet and an internal landline connected to the condo upstairs. When I lifted the receiver to test it, I heard the dial tone. It still worked. I laughed softly. It could be a lifeline, or a line that ties someone down. I set a wooden chair, a light blanket, and our wedding photo on a little table. "If you won't protect yourself, don't blame them for treating you poorly," Gil used to say. I looked at his picture and nodded. The next evening, I heard a knock. Brandon walked in wearing a crisp shirt, but his voice was dry. "Is the room ready?" "Yes." "If you embarrass us, I'll put you in a nursing home. Don't try anything." I didn't answer. I slid my hand into my pocket where a tiny recorder was glowing. "Are you finished?" I asked, barely above a breath. "Yeah." "Then so am I." He left and the door slammed. Footsteps faded up the stairs. I stood in that small room, drew a deep breath, and hit record again. I looked around the cold walls, the metal box, Gil's photo. And I knew, from the darkest corner of this home, I would start lighting my life again. I don't even know why I picked up the landline that day. Maybe it was the habit of a former bookkeeper, always checking whether things work. The morning was quiet. Sunlight fell across the small table in the storage room I'd turned into a temporary bed. On the shelf sat a thermos of coffee and Gil's photo, his kind smile telling me to stay calm. I meant only to dust the wall phone and see if it worked. But as my hand touched the receiver, I heard a soft click, and then a familiar voice, my son's. "Did you finish the checks?" Brandon said, voice low. "Done," Tessa replied, almost eager. I told my parents the condo's worth $650,000. My dad even said you have a good eye. I froze. 650,000? I gripped the receiver, terrified but silent. Brandon gave a short laugh. Good. Let them think that. Can't have them knowing my mother bought it cheap. They'd say, I'm not capable. I know, Tessa said, her voice light as silk and sharp as a blade. Pratt men have pride. My dad always told me, don't marry a man who can't afford a proper home. Brandon paused, then sighed. That's why I need that number. Don't let them doubt anything. I leaned against the wall, forcing down the tremor. So that 650,000 Tessa told me to repeat was just a small piece of a bigger plan, a full script to turn this condo into theirs. Still holding the receiver, my heart pounding, I heard Tessa again, slow, calculating. What about the old woman? We can't let your mother stay here forever. I can't stand pretending she's the owner. Brandon gave the same sly laugh I'd heard when he was a child caught lying. I'm on it. I have a cousin who's a psychiatrist. He owes me a favor, $5,000, and he'll sign off that my mother has cognitive decline. Then we can petition the court for guardianship. My hand turned cold, fingers numb. And then? Tessa asked, as if discussing a simple purchase. Then, Brandon said, we'll sell the condo and move her to a cheap nursing home out in the suburbs. Trust me, those places only need a few months and that's it. Older folks don't handle being yanked from their environment. They go downhill fast. Tessa let out a thin laugh that turned my blood to ice. You're cruel. No, Brandon said softly. I'm practical. My father was too soft. I'm not. I pressed the receiver tighter, barely breathing. Each word pricked like a needle. Tessa asked, You're sure she suspects nothing? Not a thing, Brandon said, smug. She still thinks I'm the dutiful son. I could take everything and she'd apologize if I raised my voice. Tessa giggled. That's insane. What mother could be that blind? She's always been that way, Brandon said. Her whole life. I set the receiver down very slowly, afraid a sound would give me away. I shook all over, but no tears came. In my mind, I heard Gil's voice from years ago. You're stronger than you think, Audrey, but only when you're pushed to the wall do you learn you can stand. Now I understood. I sat in the old wooden chair, my fingers finding the tiny recorder in my pocket. I hit record, repeating exactly what they'd said, every detail, every number, every step. Then I photographed the wall clock proof of the call time. I saved everything carefully. The shaking stopped. A cold clarity took over. About an hour later, when I stepped out of that basement room, I saw Brandon and Tessa strolling the lobby with her parents, hand in hand, smiling like model spouses. I walked by quietly with a trash bag so they wouldn't notice. Tessa glanced at me, a stiff smile. Hi, Mom. Is it okay down there? I left some extra blankets for you. I nodded and smiled. Thank you. It's very quiet. Good, she said lightly, turning to her mother. She's a bit sensitive, but very sweet. Everyone laughed. Glassware clinked. I kept walking, saying nothing. Each step sealed another door inside me, the door of trust, of motherhood, of hope. That night I sat at the small desk in the basement, opened my laptop, and copied the recording to a USB labeled Conversation, Proof 1. I photographed the call log from the internal phone and emailed it to myself. I was grateful for my cautious nature, the same habit coworkers once teased as the double-check lady. Turns out, it's what was saving me. A draft slipped under the basement door, and the night air felt dry and cold. I pulled on a sweater, my eyes landing on Gil's photo. I spoke softly, as if he could still hear. See that? They want everything, but I won't make it easy. In my mind, I knew exactly who to call, someone I trusted, someone who had never failed me. Naomi Brooks. Naomi and I had been friends since our 20s. We once worked at the same company, quick, tough, and a believer in justice. Later, she went to law school and became a civil attorney focusing on elder rights. We hadn't seen each other in years, but her number stayed in my phone as if my heart knew I would need her someday. I called. Her voice was warm and steady, just like before. "Goodness, Audrey, it's been ages. Are you okay?" I paused, holding back a sob. "Naomi, I need to see you, as soon as possible." Hearing my shaking voice, she turned serious. "What happened?" "I can't say over the phone. Just know, someone is trying to take my home. Someone in the family." Silence on the line. Then Naomi spoke, firm and low. "Listen to me, Audrey. Do not say another word to them. Stay quiet and gather everything: texts, recordings, documents. Don't react, don't get angry, don't cry. I'll drive to Charlotte in the morning. Understood?" I nodded, though she couldn't see. "Thank you, Naomi." "No thanks needed," she said gently. "From now on, you're not alone." After we hung up, I sat a long time, listening to the clock tick. Far-off traffic hummed like a memory. The basement room felt less tight. I drew a deep breath and closed my eyes. In the dark, Gil's voice came back. "You're stronger than you think." I smiled faintly. "Yes, I am stronger than I think." And this time, I would prove it not with tears, but with the truth. I didn't sleep that night. Brandon and Tessa's voices still echoed like a tunnel, every word of their plan to strip me of everything. Near dawn, I got up, turned on the lamp, and chose something I'd never dared before: face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. In a steel case I'd brought from the old house, there was a small black lockbox. Gil had told me, "Keep it in case you ever need it." He used to store important papers there: insurance, savings certificates, even a few unsigned will drafts. I hadn't opened it since he died. But that morning, with first light slipping under the basement door, I felt I had to. I pulled the box out, wiped the thin layer of dust, and slid in the tiny key I still kept on Gil's old keyring. A soft click, and the lid lifted. Inside were neatly stacked folders, Gil's familiar tidy handwriting on each cover. One made my heart seize: "Brandon, confidential." I sat down, hands trembling, and turned the pages. Printed emails, handwritten notes, a few yellowed receipts. My eyes froze on the first line of one email. "Dad, please help me this one last time. Just 10,000. I promise I'll pay it back in 6 months." Below it, Gil's reply in blue ink: "Brandon, this is the 5th time this year. Tell me the truth, what is going on?" I read on. The next pages tracked every amount. April 2018, $8,000, co-worker's investment. September 2018, $12,000, Tessa's hospital. February 2019, $15,000, short-term loan real estate project. August 2020, $20,000. Startup investment. And most recent, just months before Gil died, $35,000, urgent loan, more than $90,000 in total taken from Gil's savings and stock sales, with promises to pay it back. On the last page, Gil had written, "Brandon, I love you, but you're pushing this too far. If there's a next time, I'll have to tell your mother." Under that line was a hurried strike-through, then a smaller line in a shaky hand: "No, I won't tell her. He's still our son." I set the paper down, my heart gripped tight. There was more. At the end of the folder was a sealed letter addressed to me. "Audrey, if you're reading this, I'm no longer there." I sat, still for a long while, then opened it. Gil's voice flowed through my mind as if he were speaking. "Audrey, I didn't hide this because I feared your anger. I feared your pain. Brandon isn't the boy you remember. He has lied, used me, even threatened me when I refused. I stayed quiet because I was afraid he'd hurt you. But I also fear that when I'm gone, you'll face him alone. If that day comes, please don't be blind. Remember, you're stronger than you think." I folded the letter, tears falling onto the desk. Gil must have sensed it all. He knew what our son was becoming, but kept silent so I could live in the illusion that our family was still whole. For the first time, I wasn't crying from grief. I was crying because I'd woken up. I looked at our wedding photo. "You're right, Gil," I whispered. "A mother's love can't stay blind forever." The next morning, Naomi arrived. In a brown coat and carrying a worn leather case, she hugged me lightly. "Where do we start?" I handed her, Brandon, confidential. She read quietly for a long time. The eyes of an experienced attorney rarely show surprise, but they still showed sorrow. "How long have you had this?" "Since Gil died." I never opened it. Naomi nodded. "Good. We can prove Brandon exploited his father financially and abused his trust." She photographed each page and backed them up to her firm's secure server. "This is called sealing electronic evidence. If anyone tries to erase or tamper with it, we still have the originals." I nodded, both relieved and bitter. Her careful steps felt like placing my life back into order after years of being dismissed. She opened a notebook and made a list. Door camera, hall camera, a mic in the storage room, you can buy them, and I'll help you register them for lawful use. And remember, don't confront. Let them expose themselves. I stared, half in awe. "Do you handle this often?" "Audrey. Plenty of older folks lose everything with a few signatures. You're lucky you have evidence, clarity, and me." We both smiled. For the first time in days, my chest felt lighter. Naomi told me to get an independent appraisal so the true $400,000 purchase price was documented. When it goes to court, they can't twist it. I booked Gil's old appraisal company for the weekend. Then Naomi suggested we go on offense not by suing right away, but by putting them under the light, invite them to dinner, willingly, let them perform their roles. We'll let them reveal themselves. I hesitated. "You think they'll come?" Naomi smiled. "People who believe they hold power always show up. Trust me." That night, I drafted the invite, hands steady. "Dear Tessa, I'd like to invite you, Brandon, and your parents to dinner this weekend. I want to thank everyone for helping me settle in. I'll make a few of Gil's favorite dishes." I didn't expect a quick reply, but 10 minutes later Tessa wrote, "That's perfect, Mom. I'll tell Brandon. My parents will be thrilled. Can I bring 2 other couples to make it cozier?" I chuckled at the word cozier. Yes, it would be warm, but the fire wouldn't come from the stove. It would come from the truth waiting to flare on the table. Before bed, I arranged everything. The original purchase contract into a clear sleeve labeled property proof, the recorded call onto a fresh USB labeled recording one. All of it tucked into a blue hard folder the same shade as Gil's favorite, shirt. I looked at that folder and whispered, "This time, I won't let anyone trample what you left. I promise." Then I turned off the light and leaned back, listening to the basement door whisper with the night breeze. For the first time in weeks, I felt calm. Not because I had won, but because I wasn't afraid to lose anymore. In the dark, the tiny camera LED glowed. Read everything was ready. The dinner they thought would be a party. For me, it would be a closed courtroom where every lie would be brought into the light. End of part 3, 1,340 words. I never imagined I'd prepare a dinner like this. Not for family, but for people who see me as a thing already traded. That afternoon, Charlotte's sunlight was gentle and gold through the kitchen glass, the kitchen I once dreamed of using to cook for Gil every morning. But today, that room echoed with my son Brandon's voice, barking orders one by one like a supervisor. "The chicken needs to be marinated more, Mom. Tessa's dad doesn't like bland food." Then, "The mashed potatoes must be really smooth, you know how picky they are." I just nodded, gently stirring the sauce. In the oven door's reflection, I caught my own eyes calm in a strange way. Tessa walked in wearing a cream silk dress and a pearl necklace, her voice sweet but her tongue sharp. "Don't forget to sprinkle black pepper on the salad. Last time you forgot the salt and the guests almost had to add it themselves." I gave a thin smile. "I remember. I won't forget anything this time." She glanced at me with a peculiar satisfaction, as if every cutting remark made her feel more powerful. Around 6:30 p.m., the doorbell rang. Brandon straightened his tie and turned to me. "Mom, step aside so we can welcome our guests." I moved back toward the kitchen and quietly watched the door open. Tessa's father, Leonard Pratt, came in first, tall, short silver hair, a stern face. He'd been a federal judge, retired for a few years. Beside him was his wife, Elaine, a fuller-figured woman with the calm air of the upper class. Behind them were two couples, business friends of the Pratt family, all polished and self-assured. The apartment glowed, hard-soled shoes clicked, perfume floated in the air. Tessa opened her arms. "Mom, Dad, this is our new home. Isn't it beautiful?" Leonard nodded. "Quite impressive. It's rare to find somewhere this quiet so close to downtown." I heard Brandon laugh. "We bought it for $650,000. Good asset, good location, worth every penny." That sentence cut into me like a blade. We bought. This condo was Gil's last dream, the place where I wanted to keep what was left of his memory. And now my son used it to show off, to lie in front of strangers. They walked into the living room, praising the rug, admiring the new chandelier Tessa bought with my credit card. I just kept setting the table. My hands sliced cake and ladled sauce with steady rhythm, but my heart had gone cold. Dinner began. They sat around the 8-seat dining table while I stood by, serving like a waiter. Brandon raised a glass of red wine, voice booming. "Thank you, Mom and Dad, and everyone, for celebrating with us. This condo is a big milestone, and partly thanks to my branded mother. Even though her health hasn't been great lately, she still tried to tidy up and cook. We're very grateful." Polite applause. Pitying eyes turned toward me. Tessa added, her tone gentle but loaded. "Mom's a little forgetful, but she loves us very much. This place is close to the hospital, so it's convenient if anything needs checking." I set down the chicken and lifted my head. "You're right," I smiled. I remember the route to the hospital very clearly, thanks to a memory that's still pretty good. No one caught the meaning, only Tessa shot Brandon a look, her lip twitching. They went on eating, laughing, talking stocks and travel. I stood still, listening to lies about me. Brandon told them he had helped Mom buy this condo because she doesn't understand paperwork, and that all maintenance and property taxes were in his name. One of Pratt's friends said, "So dutiful." "Not many kids do that." Brandon gave a smug smile. "I'm just doing what a son should. My mother is a bit confused sometimes, so I have to watch over things." I drew a slow breath to stay steady. I had been waiting for this moment. When Leonard set down his glass, I stepped closer with a blue file folder in hand. "Sorry to interrupt," I said evenly. "I'd like to say a few words." The room went still. All eyes turned to me. Brandon frowned. "Mom, we're just a few minutes," I cut in, "because there seems to be some misunderstanding about this condo." I set the folder on the table. "This is the original purchase contract, price $400,000, paid from my account, not anyone else's. Included are the tax receipts and the wire confirmations from Regions Bank." People glanced at each other. Leonard raised an eyebrow. Tessa went pale. I continued, still calm. "And this," I pulled out a small USB, "is a recording of Brandon and Tessa discussing how to declare me incompetent, petition for guardianship, and sell this condo. They even discussed the price and the facility they planned to put me in, a cheap nursing home in the suburbs." A spoon clinked hard against a plate. Brandon shot up. "What are you talking about?" You're making this up. Sit down, Brandon, Leonard said, low and firm. I nodded to him. Thank you, Judge Pratt. I took out my phone and played the audio. Brandon's voice rang out clearly. My cousin will sign that she's not competent, then we sell the place. When older folks get pulled out of their environment, they go downhill fast. Tessa jolted, blood draining from her face. Leonard sat up straight, the cold eyes of a man who'd sat on the bench for more than 30 years cutting through them. Stop, he said. Play it again from the beginning. I did. Every sentence, every laugh, every calculation echoed through the room like knives tearing through the facade they'd built. When the recording ended, a heavy silence fell. Pratt's friend, a middle-aged man with glasses who'd introduced himself as a family and marital assets attorney, spoke grimly. If this recording is authentic, there are at least 3 crimes here. Conspiracy to defraud assets, coercion of an elderly person, and attempted deprivation of property rights. Each can carry up to 10 years. It cracked the air like thunder. Tessa gasped and grabbed Brandon's hand. Say something, Brandon! But Brandon said nothing. His face flushed, his eyes blazed. I recognized it, the look of the 10-year-old who smashed a window when he didn't get a toy. He growled, You're nothing. That money is mine. It was my father's, and I'm the only son. You blew it without asking anyone. That's right, I said softly. Because he left it to me, not to someone planning to throw me out of my own home. The air thickened. Elaine looked from me to her daughter, lips trembling. Tessa, is this true? Tessa burst into tears and tried to grab her mother's hand, but Elaine pulled away. Leonard stood, his voice low and heavy as a gavel. I thought my daughter chose a decent man. Turns out she married someone willing to rob his own mother. Brandon, if I were still on the bench, you wouldn't get a chance to argue. Brandon turned on me, eyes burning. Are you doing this to humiliate me? I was only trying to help. I met his eyes, my voice even. No, Brandon. You were trying to help yourself. No one spoke. One of Pratt's friends rose first, muttering, I think dinner's over. The second followed, then Elaine, then Leonard. The door closed, and the apartment held only 3, me, Brandon, and Tessa. No laughter, no clinking dishes, only the truth sitting on the table beside a file folder and a small USB. I cleared each spilled glass of wine and each crumpled napkin and felt light. The dinner they had expected was over, but for me, the first chapter of justice had just begun. After everyone left, the apartment was so quiet I could hear the clock in the living room. Overhead lights fell across the tablecloth, highlighting stains of red wine, the traces of a dinner I would never forget. Brandon stood in the middle of the room, face flushed, fists clenched. Tessa collapsed into a chair, shoulders shaking fear or anger, I couldn't tell. I knew if I didn't end this night with a decisive move, I would never have peace. So I walked to the glass cabinet and opened the hidden compartment Naomi had helped me prepare. Inside lay a thick packet tied with a blue ribbon. I carried it to the table and set it down. There's something you don't know, I said, oddly calm. Brandon stared at the packet. What now, Mom? The deed? You want to keep performing this little show? I looked straight at him. No, Brandon. This is my new will. More specifically, an irrevocable trust. Tessa. I looked up, surprised. Irrevocable. Trust? That's right. I opened the file and showed them page by page. Naomi helped me set it up legally, notarized by a law office with 2 independent witnesses. All assets, including this condo, my savings, and remaining investments have been transferred into the trust. I can't pull them back, and no one can amend them without a court order. Brandon squinted. Then who's the beneficiary? I turned to the second page, voice steady. Not you, and not Tessa. He froze, his face twitching. Then who? The Elder Abuse Protection Fund, with Naomi and her firm as legal advisors. When I pass, Everything will be donated to help people like me who were threatened, controlled, and humiliated by their own family." Silence swallowed the room. Brandon let out a hard laugh. "You're joking. I'm your only son." I nodded gently. "You're right, but sons don't shove their mothers into cheap nursing homes or hire fake doctors to sign mental health papers to steal a home. I only—" "Enough, Brandon." I cut in, low and firm. "Gil Whitmore's son doesn't behave like that. If you had any of your father's blood, you'd be ashamed." Tessa shot to her feet. "Wait, how did you set that up? An irrevocable trust can still be voided if the grantor lacked capacity at signing." "You can't." A light laugh came from the doorway. Naomi stepped in, gray coat over her shoulders. Another case in hand. "You're right, Tessa. If Mrs. Audrey lacked capacity, this would be void. Unfortunately for you," she set a small USB on the table, "we recorded a capacity confirmation with an independent psychologist and a notary. All of it's on file." Tessa went white. Brandon swung toward Naomi, voice rough. "Who are you to butt into my family's business?" Naomi smiled, arms crossed. "I'm his mother's attorney. And I strongly advise you not to say anything else that could be used against you in the coming case." Brandon slammed his hand on the table. "You did this to destroy me? To make me a criminal?" I met his eyes, steady enough to make him step back half a pace. "No, Brandon, I'm protecting what's left of my life and your father's honor. You made yourself into a criminal." I didn't need to help. The air thickened. Brandon grabbed the documents, flipped through a few pages, then hurled them onto the table. "This isn't over." "You think a stack of papers can bury me?" I didn't react. I simply opened my phone, hit record, and said quietly, "Thank you for stating your intent. Consider this more evidence of threats and coercion." He glared at me. "You'll regret this." Naomi cut in, voice cool as ice. "If you're planning violence, remember there are lawful cameras here, and everything you say is backed up to the cloud." Tessa tugged his sleeve, whispering, "Let's go, Brandon." "Don't let them." Record more. But Brandon stood rigid, lips shaking with rage. "You canceled the will, you set up a trust, you changed the locks, but you're still my mother." "You'll do what I say!" I shook my head and placed a new set of keys on the table. "No, Brandon, I changed every lock this afternoon, door fobs and the basement lock. You no longer have a spare. If you come in again without permission, that's trespassing." Tessa's voice trembled. "Aren't you afraid?" I looked at her. No anger left, just fatigue. "I am. But fear doesn't earn respect. This time I choose peace, even if it means facing my own son." Tessa looked down, as if something had finally sunk in. Brandon didn't. He snatched up the file, threw it to the floor, then stormed out. Before he left, he shouted, "This isn't over! You'll pay for this!" The door slammed like thunder on a clear day. To be honest, I still get a chill when I hear, "You'll pay for this!" But the glint of my new keys eased my heart. What about you? What struck you more, the threat or the slam of the lock? Leave a few words in the comments. I'll read and cherish every line. The apartment fell silent again. I took a deep breath to steady myself. Naomi stepped over, picked up the scattered file, and put it neatly back together. "Judge Pratt was right," she said quietly. "You need to secure every piece of evidence. He's losing control, and when people like that feel cornered, they can do anything." I nodded. "I know, but this time I'm not hiding." The door opened. Leonard Pratt and Elaine had come back. Maybe they still couldn't believe what they'd seen. Leonard moved closer, his voice warm but firm. "Mrs. Audrey, I owe you an apology for my daughter. I didn't imagine Tessa would go this far." "I don't blame you, Judge Pratt," I said softly. "When parents believe their child is good, we don't see the rest." He nodded, eyes stern. "Then listen to me. Protect your evidence, recordings, copies, cameras, all of it. Your son," I see danger in his eyes. Naomi added, I'll arrange to move everything to a secure archive and send a copy to the local police in case of any trespass. Leonard's voice roughened. If you need it, I still have friends in the system. One call. I smiled gratefully. Thank you, but I think I'll be okay. I have an attorney, evidence, and the belief that I deserve peace. Elaine laid a hand on my shoulder. Not everyone who has children gets love. But you chose, right? You chose yourself? I squeezed her hand. I don't want to beat anyone. I just want to live without bowing my head. They left. Naomi stayed to help me clean up. When it was just the two of us, she looked around, worried. This isn't over, Audrey. He won't give up easily. I let out a small, tired laugh but stood firm. I know. But at least now, all the pieces are face up. The rest? Let the law do its job. I walked Naomi to the door and locked it tight. The light reflected off the new deadbolt. Bright, cold, solid. I touched it and whispered to myself, this isn't just a lock. It's the lock on a new life. In the hall, a draft slipped under the door like a warning. Peace is only temporary. But for the first time in months, I wasn't afraid. I'd gone too far to turn back. On the other side, in the dark, I knew Brandon was planning his next move, and so was I. After that dinner, I thought things would calm down, that Brandon would need time to think, to realize he'd gone too far. I was wrong. Sometimes when someone used to controlling others loses that grip, they don't stop, they escalate. On the first day after the confrontation, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Mom, just listen. I didn't mean it, I just got heated. I didn't respond. I remembered Naomi's words. Don't react, Audrey. Anything he says could be bait. An hour later, the 10th call came. 3 days, did you hear me? 72 hours. If you don't cancel that damn trust, you'll regret it. I hung up and saved the recording. And so it went. Brandon's tone swung like a pendulum all day, begging, threats, fake sympathy. I sat in the living room, hearing my own child through the speaker, not fear now, but a mix of sorrow and ice. That evening, Tessa called. Mrs. Audrey, I'm bringing a doctor to see you. Just a quick check to make sure you're stable. Her voice was so sweet, I had to stop myself from laughing. Fine, I said. Come on over. I texted Naomi immediately. Less than half an hour later, Tessa's Lexus pulled up. A man in a white coat with a badge reading Dr. Stephen Harris came with her. He shook hands with the security guard and said loudly, I'm here at the son's request to assess the patient's mental health. The guard nodded, but I was inside watching on the new camera Naomi had installed. When Tessa rang, Naomi appeared behind them with a local officer. Excuse me, Naomi said evenly. May I see your medical license? The man fumbled and produced a fake card with a crooked logo and a misspelled name. Naomi frowned. Thank you. I'll verify that. She turned to the officer. Can you check the North Carolina Medical Registry for this name? 5 minutes later, the officer said quietly, No such person. You're under arrest for impersonating a medical professional. Tessa went pale. I didn't know. Brandon must have. Naomi just smiled. You can explain that. At the station. They were escorted away. I stood in my apartment listening to the door close, feeling both bitter and relieved. The worst thing wasn't being attacked, it was watching your own family become strangers before your eyes. The next 3 days, it didn't stop. On Tuesday at midday, 2 rumpled men in suits knocked. They claimed to be from the Elder Protection Agency, speaking in thick Southern drawls. We got a report that Mrs. Audrey Whitmore is being isolated. We need a safety check. I watched on the door camera. One was smoking in the hallway. The other held a grimy notepad with misspelled headings. I pressed the intercom. Elder protection staff don't show up smoking at someone's door. One raised an eyebrow and sneered. Think you're smart, do you? Naomi was at her office, but one text from me was enough. 10 minutes later, she arrived with real police. The two were cuffed for impersonating officials. Naomi turned to me, firm. See, Audrey? When your boundaries begin to hold, bad actors will try everything to take them back. That's when we do the opposite, reinforce them. That afternoon, her tech team installed a full camera system, one in the living room, two in the hallways, a small one near the kitchen window. Everything tied into building security and Naomi's phone. You don't have to. Open the door for anyone, she said. If anything's off, I'll get the alert before you do. I nodded, feeling safer than I had in a long time. Late Thursday night, just before midnight, I'd barely turned off the lights when glass shattered in the kitchen. A sharp, icy sound split the quiet. I jolted upright, heart pounding. Cold air poured through the busted window, along with heavy footsteps. "Where are you?" Brandon's voice. I held my breath, slipped into the bedroom closet, eased the door shut, and clutched my phone. "No one saw us, right?" Tessa's shaky voice. "Shut up," Brandon snapped. "We just need those files and everything's ours." I shook not from fear, but from disbelief at how far the sun I'd raised had fallen. The motion sensor triggered the soft hallway lights part of Naomi's setup. 2 seconds later, my phone buzzed. "Intrusion detected. Stay quiet, police, en route." I heard them rummaging in the kitchen, things hitting the rand floor, then Tessa's choked whisper, "Brandon, we're wrong. Stop." He only yelled, "Shut up. It's her fault. If not for that damn trust, we wouldn't have to do this." Blue lights flickered outside. Sirens sliced the night. "Police! Drop everything!" I cracked the closet door and caught a glimpse of Brandon turning, face ashen. For an instant, our eyes met the same eyes that once begged me for bedtime stories, now wild with panic and hate. Then the shout, "On the ground!" Heavy footsteps, the cold, final click of handcuffs. Tessa cried. Brandon was silent. Naomi rushed in, draped a coat over my shoulders, and pulled me from the closet. "It's over, Audrey." They were caught in the act, breaking and entering, vandalism, harassment, threats. I sat on the couch, hands shaking, breath ragged. Naomi held up her phone and replayed the footage. Brandon smashing the window, stepping inside, Tessa behind him, hands trembling, their voices crystal clear. "I'll file everything. The cameras and audio are enough to get a permanent restraining order," she said. I nodded, tears slipping down, uncertain if from fear or release. Outside, officers took statements. Blue and red lights spilled across the broken glass, scattering like memories weaving old and new. I stood and looked around the wrecked kitchen, the shards glittering in the glow. And in that mess, I realized I was still here, still fully entitled to stand in my own home. For the first time in months, I felt a nameless kind of strength, the kind you only find when you dare to set a final boundary. The next morning after the police left, I called a repairman to replace the glass and change every lock yet again. Naomi sat with me in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, her voice calm but firm. "We'll file everything with the court this week. Brandon will face the consequences. And this time, the law will speak for you." I nodded softly. Outside the window, the first light of dawn spilled through the new pane, clear, bright, dustless. I touched the glass, felt the cold on my fingertips, and smiled. "Do you see this, Gil?" I whispered. "Our home is finally safe." On the morning of the hearing, Charlotte lay under a thin veil of mist, as if the city were holding its breath. I stepped out of Naomi's car, leather gloves warming hands that still trembled a little. A few reporters lingered by the oak doors, cameras lifted. Naomi murmured, "Don't worry, they don't know your face. We asked the court to protect your identity." I nodded. I've stood in plenty of dry offices and signed hundreds of accounting forms in my life, but I had never entered a courtroom as both a victim and the person standing up for herself. The courtroom was small, just 12 gallery seats. Brandon sat across the aisle in a black suit, head slightly bowed, face gaunt but eyes still flashing defiance. Tessa sat a few rows away, avoiding his gaze. The judge read out the charges, clear and steady. Defendant Brandon Pierce is charged with breaking and entering, property damage, harassment, and threats against an elderly person. Today's hearing is to review evidence and decide on a restraining order. Brandon's attorney, a gray-haired man with a confident stance, stood first. Your Honor, this entire situation stems from Mrs. Audrey Whitmore's agitation and emotional instability. My client only came to talk, but given her history of stress after her husband's death, she overreacted. The matter has been exaggerated. I clenched my hands, but Naomi rested hers lightly on mine, a quiet signal to breathe. Our turn, she said, then rose, her calm voice cutting like a cold blade. Your Honor, we have authenticated evidence proving Mrs. Audrey is fully competent, stable, and the one who was attacked, not the other way around. She presented a sealed packet, independent appraisal of the condo, $400,000, signed by Hamilton and Lee Real Estate. A capacity confirmation video recorded by Dr. Daughter. Evan Carter, a licensed psychologist in North Carolina, affirming I was fully lucid and understood all legal decisions at the time I signed the trust. Transparent financial statements provided by independent accountant Mia Delgado, showing no outside influence over my income or spending. Naomi faced the bench, voice slow and precise. Your Honor, no one is controlling Mrs. Audrey. She is exercising a basic right every citizen has to protect her property and her dignity. The defense objected. The judge motioned them quiet. Naomi signaled, and a precinct officer brought in a sealed USB. This is the break-in footage from the night of June 23rd, she said. The court monitor lit up, Brandon in frame, hard object in hand, smashing the kitchen window and climbing in. Tessa behind him, voice shaking. Brandon, we're wrong. The audio was crisp. There was no room to deny it. When the clip ended, the room fell silent. I could hear the clock on the wall. The defense cleared his throat, reaching, Your Honor, this was a momentary emotional lapse, not an intent to harm. Enough, the judge cut in. The evidence is more than clear. Naomi stood. We request a restraining order within a radius of 300 meters and temporary probation. The judge nodded and made notes. Brandon lifted his head, face drained. He wanted to speak, but when his eyes met mine, his lips only quivered, no words came out. During the short recess, I sat in a side room and took a long breath. Tessa suddenly stepped in, dark circles under her eyes, voice rough. Mrs. Audrey, I want to cooperate. I know I was wrong. Naomi stiffened, but I signaled her to let me listen. Tessa stared at the table. Brandon said, if you kept resisting, he would slip a sleeping pill into your evening tea. I thought he was bluffing, but... She went quiet. Tears slid down. I didn't think he'd actually do it. Naomi nodded. Are you willing to sign a statement? Tessa whispered. Yes. I just want this to end. Back in the courtroom, Tessa took the stand. The judge asked, Do you swear to tell the truth? Yes, Your Honor. She recounted everything. Brandon's repeated plans to make me seem unstable, the search for a fake doctor, even talk of light dosing to make her confused. I closed my eyes and let each word land like a stone. It hurt, but strangely, it didn't wound the way it once did. It felt like a long chapter closing. The judge ruled, Defendant Brandon Pierce is placed on 18 months probation and is barred from approaching the plaintiff within a radius of 300 meters, including by phone or electronic means. Any violation will be converted to jail time immediately. The prosecutor added, separate investigations are underway regarding medical impersonation and impersonating public officials. Tessa bowed her head, murmured, I'm sorry. I met her eyes. I know. But the apology isn't for me, it's for yourself. As people filed out, a familiar, solemn voice came from behind. "Mrs. Audrey." I turned. Judge Leonard Pratt approached, face sorrowful but sincere. I want to apologize as a father. We didn't raise our child for this." I looked at him and offered a small smile. "Every family has its own lesson to learn, Judge Pratt. What matters is who's willing to learn it." He nodded and squeezed my hand. "If you need anything, I'll help. I just need peace," I said. "And justice like today." When I stepped outside, sunlight flooded the street. Charlotte seemed to glow after so many days of rain. Naomi walked beside me, a gentle smile on her face. "You did it, Audrey! You didn't just win a case, you won against your past." I looked up into the clear blue. "No one won here, Naomi. Someone simply learned to stand." A reporter came closer, cautious. "Ma'am, we've heard you're a victim in a recent elder abuse case. Would you like to share anything?" I hesitated, then said, "I don't want to talk about myself. I want people to remember that elder abuse isn't only physical. It starts with words, with taking, with contempt. If you stay silent too long, they start to believe you don't have a voice." I paused, looking into the lens. "At some point, you have to speak not for revenge, but to live." She thanked me. I stepped down the stairs. The air carried sun-warmed lavender from the nearby park. I breathed deeply, my lungs opening as if for the first real breath in ages. A group of students laughed in the distance. A woman walked her dog. Church bells drifted on the breeze, simple, peaceful, and to me, light after the storm. I turned to Naomi. "You know, maybe Gil is looking down." Smiling, she nodded. "And I'm sure he's proud." I smiled, and as if closing my own journey out loud, said, "In the end, no one can take my life from me when I'm the one willing to protect it." Charlotte shone that day. And for me, it was the first morning of a new beginning. One morning in mid-August, with soft sun and a hint of lavender blowing in from the balcony, Naomi brought someone new. "Mrs. Audrey," she said, "this is Linda Park, Director of Safe Steps for Seniors, which supports older adults facing abuse or financial exploitation. I think you two will have a lot to talk about." Linda, a Korean-American woman around 60, was small-framed with bright eyes and a warm smile. Her handshake was cool and steady. "I read about your case," she said gently but decisively. "Thank you for speaking up. Few people have the courage to do that, especially with family." I smiled and invited her in. We sat at the dining table that had once been a battlefield where every lie was stripped away. Today, it felt quiet and safe. Coffee in the air, distant traffic humming. After a few minutes, Linda set down her cup and looked around. "Mrs. Audrey, I have a bold idea, and I'll regret not saying it if I keep quiet." "Please," I said. "This place warm, quiet, safe, could it become a temporary refuge for a few older women? Just for a few days when they've just left dangerous situations until they're moved to stable housing." I went still. I could see myself from months ago shaking, seeking a door away from threatening voices. "You mean, let them stay here?" "Not exactly." Linda smiled. "We don't want to intrude on your privacy. Maybe the adjacent service wing, in the same building, short-term units, or even just a community room, a place to breathe, eat a hot meal, and remember they're not alone." I fell quiet. Sunlight flashed on the pane I'd just replaced, clean and clear like another new start. "Let me think," I said, and, honestly, my heart began to stir with something not called fear, but purpose. That evening, I reread the building policies. The complex had a serviced wing short-term apartments rented for a few weeks. I remembered a clause. Residents could lease one long-term for personal or non-profit use, pending approval. The next morning, Naomi and I met with the building manager. I'd like to secure a unit in the service block, I said. Not for commercial rental, as a temporary refuge for older women in crisis. He looked surprised. But when Naomi produced the trust paperwork and our partnership plan with safe steps for seniors, the tone shifted. That's a wonderful idea, he said. We'll need an internal review, but I doubt there'll be objections. Naomi smiled at me. And for taxes, don't worry. I'll structure a compliant nonprofit framework. Your trust can allocate operating funds without violating any terms. 3 weeks later, I held the keys to a new unit, 3rd floor, west-facing, with a small balcony over the park. I stood in the empty room and drew a deep breath. Fresh paint, clean wood, and something pure, the scent of freedom. Linda's team came to help set up. Nothing fancy, she said. Just safety. We placed 3 low wooden beds, a small dining table, a bookshelf, a lounge chair, and a board with simple affirmations. You still matter. You still belong. I enrolled in an online psychological first aid and elder safety course offered by Duke. Short sessions, but they helped me understand trauma and isolation, the kind I and so many others had borne. Naomi handled the paperwork, and Linda introduced me to Patricia Hale, a social worker who'd spent years in domestic violence shelters. Patricia's voice was soft as cotton. When she entered a room, the air seemed to settle. "Mrs. Audrey," she said, "I feel lucky to start this with you." The first women arrived in early fall. Beatrice, 70, kicked out by her son after she refused to sell her co-op to invest. Joan, 73, saddled with debt after a grandson borrowed her name for credit cards. Lila, 61, fresh from a marriage where her medication had been controlled for 7 years. They came looking different, one with a torn suitcase, one with a plastic bag of clothes, but their eyes held the same dullness of lost trust. I saw myself in them, anxious, doubtful, unsure the world could be kind again. On the first night, we ate together. Simple food, chicken soup, toast, apple salad. No one said much until I lifted my water glass and said, "We're not victims, we're on our way back to ourselves." The room went quiet, then Beatrice began to cry. Joan laid a hand on her shoulder. Lila managed a small smile. We built a small routine. Morning light exercise on the balcony. Afternoon basic banking skills, reading statements, protecting accounts. Evening group counseling with Patricia Spacebat to tell our stories. On weekends, I ran a tech basics session, how to use a phone, video call, create strong passwords. Something gentle and surprising happened within weeks. Beatrice started to laugh again. Joan wrote a letter thanking her bank for helping resolve fraudulent debt. Lila asked to learn more computer skills to find remote work. One winter evening, I watched them around the table under a warm lamp, laughter mingling with the faint clink of cutlery, and thought, I didn't just survive. I am living again and helping others do the same. One afternoon, Linda brought a small carved wooden sign. "You should name this place," she said. "A name?" I smiled. "I haven't thought of one." Naomi pointed to the carving. "The W room, where we return to ourselves." I read it slowly, each word touching a tender place. The W room, where we return to ourselves. Linda smiled. W for Whitmore, or for women, or for we. Who knows? Maybe for will to live, I said, eyes stinging a little. That night, I sat by the window, light stretching like golden threads across the park. In the unit next door, 3 women cooked dinner once broken, now piecing life back together. I opened Gil's old notebook and wrote one last line. "If you're still here with me, you can see it." I did what we both believed in, turned pain into a shelter for others. I closed the book and smiled. The door to the W room swung open. Patricia stepped in with a small bouquet. "Mrs. Audrey," she said, "they want to thank you for dinner and for this place." "No need," I answered. I'm giving them what I once wished for, a door that opens. In the hall, a breeze rattled the new wooden sign. Under the light, the carving stood out. The W room, where we return to ourselves. I stared at it for a long time, feeling a deep, quiet peace. I didn't just survive. I came back, and with me, other two women, into a new chapter where care outgrows fear, and a grandmother once sent to the basement now opens the door for light to come in. That night, Beatrice had a panic attack. She woke gasping, hands shaking, eyes wild as if the room had turned back into the house where her son barked at her every morning. I rushed in and held her hand. "You're safe, Beatrice. You're in the W room. No one can touch you here." She nodded, but tears kept coming, her body curled tight. I stayed until her breathing slowed. Near 3 a.m., Beatrice finally slept. As I rose to leave, moonlight fell on a framed photo of the three of us at the W room's opening. I looked at it, warm and heavy all at once. Recovery, I realized, is never a straight line. The next morning, Joan sat before a new stack of bank papers, face pale. "I can't read any of this," she whispered. "I'm scared, Audrey. Every time I see numbers on a page, I hear my grandson's voice. 'Sign it, Grandma.' It's just a form." I knew that fear not of words or numbers, but of memories of being tricked. That afternoon, I called accountant Mia Delgado, who had helped me prepare for court. "Mia, can you teach a read, understand, sign class for my group? We need someone to decode this world of paperwork." Mia laughed on the phone. "A finance class for grandmas? I love it. I'll be there tomorrow." The session was special. Mia brought a whiteboard and wrote simple truths. Sign equals agree. Read equals protect yourself. She flagged common scams and showed how to call bank hotlines and underscored no one is too old to understand, only taught to be afraid. Joan listened closely, and for the first time in years, she signed the confirmation for her own new account, hands still trembling, smile bright. Lila, the youngest, still wasn't sleeping. She often jolted awake at 2 or 3 a.m., staring into the dark. One evening, Patricia arrived with a deck of therapy cards. "Story, cards," she said. "Each one is a feeling. Pick the one that's you." Lila chose a card of a woman at a door, key in hand. I don't know whether to open or close it," she whispered. "That's okay," Patricia said. "What matters is that you're holding the key, not anyone else." Listening outside, I felt my chest ease. They were reclaiming control, the thing I once thought I'd lost forever. One sunny afternoon, I rehung Gil's photo where the morning light lands. Quietly, as if he were in the room, I said, "We're using the remaining $200,000 just as you wanted, not to run, but to build a place where someone can stand again when they thought they'd fallen." His gentle smile seemed to agree. I touched the glass and felt an unfamiliar peace. A week later, the local precinct called. "Mrs. Whitmore, quick update. Brandon Pierce made a minor violation of the order. He parked near the building for a few minutes, then left. We issued a warning and added electronic monitoring. I was silent for a moment. News like that used to rattle me. This time it felt like a small wave that touched shore and faded. "I understand," I said. "Thank you for letting me know." I hung up and looked out at the afternoon sun on the street. I realized I wasn't shaking anymore. I wasn't living in fear. I was living in clarity. More and more, the complex embraced the W room. First, a few curious neighbors stopped by. Then they brought baked goods, hot soup, even signed up to teach yoga and read aloud in the evenings. An older gentleman upstairs gave us a rose bush. "To make the room prettier," he said, "so anyone who comes in can see hope." Warmth bloomed in my chest. When you dare to open a door, the light doesn't just come in, it invites kindness with it. 3 months in, the media noticed. A woman reporter called, "Mrs. Audrey, we'd like to do a feature on this community program. Your story could inspire many. I thought a long time, then said, okay, on one condition. Don't name my son. Let the story be about what we're building, not what we lost. She was quiet, then said, I understand. We'll honor that. The piece ran the next week with a plain headline, From Hurt to Hope, a small corner in Charlotte for mothers once forgotten. It drew thousands of shares, but not only praise. Amid warm comments were cutting lines, she must not be so innocent. If her son hates her, there's a reason. Old and trying to play hero. The first time I read them, I winced. Then I remembered Naomi. The internet doesn't know the truth, only you do. I learned to mute, not engage, and never let strangers decide my worth. One quiet evening while I sorted files, my phone buzzed. A text from Lila, thank you for giving us a name, not just victim. I read that line over and over, tears falling while my lips still held a smile. Outside, a breeze slipped through the hallway, making the wooden sign, the W room where we return to ourselves, gently rattle. I looked around the apartment. Beatrice was brewing tea. Joan was straightening the curtains. Patricia was jotting notes for tomorrow's group session. None of us is perfect. None of us has never broken. But each one is learning how to piece herself back together with patience, with trust, and with a quiet kind of strength only those who have fallen truly understand. I suddenly remembered Gil's words, you're stronger than you think. Now I understand that sentence fully. Strength isn't never falling, it's standing up, brushing off the dust, and moving forward without retreat. I lit a small candle. The warm light reflected on his picture frame. Gil, I whispered. We took a long way around to get back to where we were meant to stand among people who know how to love and be loved. Outside, Charlotte sparkled at night. A new chapter was opening, not loud, not dazzling, but bright enough to light the way for those still finding their way back to themselves. One early winter morning, when mist still blurred the lake, Naomi stepped into the W room with a thick envelope. Mail for you, Audrey, she said, setting it on the table. From Brandon's attorney. I looked at the beige envelope, the neat italic type, and felt my chest tighten. It had been almost 8 months since the hearing ended. I thought the waters had finally calmed. Naomi sat across from me, cautious. I read it. Nothing legal, just Brandon asking to meet. Says he wants to apologize and end things peacefully. I was quiet. Old memories surged. My son's voice that night. You'll pay for this. The shatter of glass, the eyes full of hatred. And yet, in the middle of those dark flashes, a small beam of light, an 8-year-old boy running around the house, shouting, Mom, I fixed the lamp. The mother's heart in me flickered for a moment, but reason pulled me back. I knew that loop, the cycle of renewed harm, remorse, pleading, then the hurting again. More than a few women in the W room had said the same line. He said sorry, and I believed him, until it happened again. I looked at Naomi. If I refuse, is that cruel? She shook her head. Forgiveness is a right, but reconnection isn't required. You can forgive and still keep distance. Sometimes the greatest kindness is knowing when to close the door. I sat a long time with the unopened letter. Finally, I picked up a pen and wrote a brief reply. Brandon, I received your message. I wish you peace and hope you find the help you need to understand and heal yourself. But I will not meet. That conversation would only take us both back to the old place. I encourage you to try therapy. And please, do not contact me again. I am not angry. I'm simply choosing to live in peace. Audrey. I signed, folded it, and handed it to Naomi. She read it and nodded. Perfect. Calm, clear, without resentment. I'll send it to his attorney. After Naomi left, I looked at Gil's photo hanging in the sunny corner. Morning light fell across that gentle smile. I said quietly. Do you see, Gil? I learned how to close a door without locking my heart. A few days later, my inbox pinged. Sender, Tessa Rowan Pierce. The subject line said only, I owe you something. I read in silence. Mrs. Audrey, I'm not trying to justify anything. I let fear and greed drive me. Brandon is no longer the person I loved. I'm in a recovery program and want to do what's right. I accept my share of responsibility and would like to make a symbolic repayment, a gift in Mr. Gil's name, whom I insulted indirectly through my actions. I understand if you won't accept it, but I want to send it to close a chapter. I forwarded it to Naomi. She read and said, if you want, I'll handle it properly. We can route it directly to the W Room Support Fund in Mr. Gil's name. I think he'd like that. I smiled. Do it. Let that intention become something good. A week later, I received a handwritten card from Judge Leonard Pratt. Inside were a few uneven lines. Wishing you health and peace. May all good things come to the W Room and the women there. Leonard and Elaine. I finished reading and smiled softly. No bitterness, no aftertaste. I filed the card in the small drawer labeled, Done. Life went on for us, simple and full of life. Beatrice grew an herb garden on the balcony. Mint, rosemary, lavender. Every morning she watered and said, each little leaf is a thank you for being alive. Joan became the W Room's treasurer. Her ledger was so tidy that Mia had to say, when I retire, you can take my chair. Lila was confident enough to volunteer at the library, teaching reading to older women. On her first day, she sent me a photo, 3 women around a table, grinning over open books. I looked at those images and felt like I was watching souls bloom after a long winter. One afternoon, I stood on the balcony and looked out. Charlotte was easing into the holidays, lights strung across buildings, their glow spilling onto the streets like a river of stars. I breathed in. The wind carried the smell of waffle cookies from the cafe nearby. In that moment, I understood more deeply than ever. I had come back to life, not because someone allowed it, but because I allowed myself to live not with the past, but with the present. I looked around the apartment that used to be a battlefield and was now a shared home. Laughter from the living room, the smell of hot soup, the evening news on TV. Peace, earned peace, not something handed to me. I realized I hadn't heard the old doorbell in a long time, that urgent alarm of a sound. That afternoon, I called a technician to change it. What kind do you want? He asked. I want a sound that doesn't startle me. When someone comes, I said. Just a light wind. When he tested it, the tone rang ting, ting, like wind moving through Beatrice's herb garden. I smiled. Perfect. That night I sat by the window finishing notes for the W Room's monthly report. Outside, light rain tapped the clean pane. I closed my notebook, about to switch off the lamp when my phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then picked up. Excuse me, is this the place for older women who've been abused? The voice was hoarse, tight, tired, the sound of someone who had cried too long. I glanced at the wooden sign on the wall, the W Room, where we return to ourselves. I took a breath and spoke softly, like a lullaby. Yes, it is. Take a breath. Come to us. It's safe here, you're not alone. Silence on the line, then a sigh, weak but full of hope. Thank you. I'll come. I set the phone down and looked around the room where every crack had been mended with trust. Outside, the wind chimes sounded softly, like the past greeting the present. I whispered to myself, letting my voice blend into that sound. This door stays open, but only for those trying to return to themselves. Then I turned off the lamp and let the hall light spill through the crack. Soft as a ribbon. The W Room was ready to welcome someone new, and another life was about to begin again, the way mine once did. That morning, Winter wind moved through the corridor, carrying damp cold and the smell of toast from downstairs. I was making tea when Linda came in, her face tense. "Mrs. Audrey," she said, closing the door gently. "We have a new case. A 76-year-old named Nora Alvarado, immigrant from Guatemala. Her grandson is holding all her papers, her green card, and her savings. She's been sleeping at a nearby church, but the priest says she's afraid to go back." I set the cup down, my heart tightening. "Does she have anywhere else to go?" "No," Linda said, "and last night it dropped close to below freezing. I think the W room is the only warm place right now." 15 minutes later, the door opened. Patricia guided in a tiny woman, loose white hair, rubber sandals worn down to shapeless. The coat on her shoulders was borrowed, buttons missing, hem torn. "Mrs. Nora," I said, stepping forward, "please sit. No one here asks about your past. We just need to know that right now you're safe." She looked up, eyes exhausted but deep. "Gracias, señora," she whispered, taking my hand dry, trembling like a leaf. That afternoon, Linda and Patricia huddled at the dining table. "The problem is documents," Linda said, opening her laptop. "If her grandson has the green card and social security number, Nora can't get any assistance." Patricia nodded. "I'll contact the city's humanitarian office. They have an emergency path for elder financial abuse. We need lawful temporary status to open a case." Added, "For food and medical care, I'll draw from the trust for the first month. Gil would definitely agree." Linda smiled, hands pausing in midair. "Mr. Gill is your husband, right?" I nodded toward the photo in the corner. "He left insurance and wished I'd use it where it belongs. I think now I know where belongs is." Patricia glanced at me, then at Nora asleep on the sofa, mouth moving lightly, as if dreaming. "Mrs. Audrey," she said softly, "he must be proud." 3 days later, Nora's temporary status was approved. Patricia shared the news over dinner. "You'll get immigration support and emergency aid. They're also letting us open a dedicated account so Nora can receive assistance directly." Nora squeezed my hand, eyes wet. "Your Mr. Gill is still here in every good decision you make." I smiled, my nose stinging. "Maybe so. I don't see him in dreams anymore, but I see him in everyone who walks through this door." By month's end, the building hosted its first community dinner. A resident initiative after seeing the W room's ripple of good. People brought home-cooked dishes, soup, cakes, salads, hot cider. No stage, just a few long tables with checkered cloths. The building manager asked me to say a few words. I stood, mic shaking a little, and looked at the kind faces, the neighbor who helped mount cameras, the widow from 6 floors up who brings cakes, the young guard who always lifts boxes. I spoke slowly. "Thank you for turning this place into a real community. We can't fix the years already gone, but we still have time to be kind. And I believe that's enough to change someone's world." Applause rose. Nora stood and hugged me from behind. A hint of mint in her hair drifted past, gentle as a thank you that didn't need words. 2 days later, Naomi brought me a digital envelope. "Email from Brandon," she said. More than 10 pages. I stared at the screen, the cursor blinking on. Unread. My heart dipped. "Did you read it?" "I did," Naomi said. "Same themes: remorse, promises to change, says he's leaving Charlotte. But Audrey, I don't think you need to read it. You've closed that chapter." I nodded, smiling slightly. "You know what I'm going to do." Naomi smiled back and clicked archive. That door closed again quietly, without sound, without resentment. That evening, Beatrice and I replaced the hallway bulbs. "Warm light makes people feel safer," I said. Beatrice nodded, smiling. "Also makes the skin look better." I laughed. When we finished, I hung a small wooden sign near the entrance, the letters cleanly carved. "If you need safety, knock 3 times. Nuban Kun and Tuan, Haigobalan. I stepped back to admire it. Just a few words, but they might be a lifeline for someone in the middle of despair. That night, wind hit the windows hard, branches tapped the glass. I was reviewing our operations. Log when I heard 3 soft knocks. Knock, knock, knock. Not the bell, not the wind. 3 clear, hesitant beats. I opened the door. A woman stood there in a raincoat, hair tangled, clutching a plastic bag with both hands. Her eyes were swollen red, her voice shook. I heard that if you need a place, you can come here. Is this the W room? I looked at her and recognized in those eyes the image of everyone who had stepped through our door lost, afraid, but still holding a shred of belief that the world could be better. I smiled and opened wide. Yes, it is. Please come in. Here, we start again with a name and a hello. She hesitated, then said softly, My name is Evelyn. I'm Audrey, I said, pouring tea. Sit down, Evelyn. We start with a cup of tea. Everything gets better from there. As she sat, Beatrice brought a towel. Lila grabbed a blanket. Joan made more tea. No one needed to ask about the past. We simply cared, as if we'd been doing it forever. Outside, the hallway light cast a warm glow on the knock 3 times sign, making it shine in the rainy night. I stood and took in the scene, my heart swelling. The W room is no longer just an apartment, it's a chosen family, not bound by blood, but by a shared belief that there's still a place to return to, whether you arrive in rain or in fear. I looked up at the city of Charlotte resting under the night, quiet, with streetlights reflected on the water. I murmured to myself, this story doesn't end. It simply transforms. And it was true when Evelyn lifted her head. A small light flickered in her eyes, the same light I once found in myself. I set down my cup and sat with them at the table. We didn't need many words. We just had to be there, present, quiet, full of meaning. Outside, the city went to sleep. And the W room, where the once abandoned are finding themselves again, stayed lit, small and steady, like a night watch flame guiding lost souls. Home. Morning in Charlotte was still. I sat by the window, dew on the frame, the sun just peeking over distant buildings. On the table, a brown leather notebook lay open, and with a slow hand, I wrote 3 words. I am still here. Not as a declaration, but as a reminder. After all the storms and the pushes to the bottom, I was still here in the same apartment that had been a battleground and was now a place of healing. I no longer needed anyone to prove I was a good mother or a faithful wife. I just needed to know I was someone who lived by her boundaries. Gil once dreamed of a quiet home where he and I would grow flowers, listen to jazz, and watch the sun set over a garden. He left before that dream took shape. But in another way, I think I made it real for him. I didn't grow flowers, I built a home for women whose voices had been taken. We don't just share space, we share strength. Voices that once shook now ring out in bright rooms. Brandon once tried to take everything: money, the condo, my dignity. But in the end, I was the one who reclaimed it all, not possessions, but my selfhood and the freedom to redefine myself. I've learned that forgiveness isn't opening the old door to someone who hurt you. Forgiveness is changing the lock. It's letting others go and keeping the peace for yourself. That morning, while everyone in the W room still slept, I opened my laptop and created a new file. Title: Anti-Elder Abuse Toolkit for Families, the W Manual. I wrote the simplest guidance: how to recognize manipulation, how to preserve evidence legally, a list of hotlines and protective laws. And finally, one closing line: you have the right to be safe, respected, and heard at any age. I plan to release it free on our community page. Naomi promised to help edit and register it. This will help more people than you think, she said. I smiled. I'm not trying to save anyone. I just want them to know. They're not alone. At noon, Beatrice called me to the balcony. Look, she pointed at the herb box. The basil bloomed. I thought it wouldn't make it through winter. I laughed. Just like us. We thought we were done, but give us a little warmth, and we bud again. Beatrice nodded, a new light in her eyes. In the living room, Joan was keeping the books, glasses sliding down her nose. Lila showed Nora how to use a smartphone. They giggled like two girls in a computer class. Looking at them, I saw a complete picture. Every wrinkle, every silver hair, every smile, each one a small victory for people who once thought they had nothing left. I set the camera on the tripod and clicked. The first group photo of the W room. Me, Beatrice, Joan, Lila, and Nora. 5 women, 5 stories, 5 different gazes, sharing one truth: we are still here. I closed my journal and wrote the final line. As long as there are 3 knocks, the W room will stay open. I set down the pretentious pen and leaned back. Outside, the curtains stirred. Mint and coffee mingled in the air. The city of Charlotte was waking. I knew there were doors still shut somewhere, women sitting silent, waiting for someone to knock. And I prayed they would hear our voices, the ones who dared to say no. I looked out at the balcony. Morning sun laid gold across the wooden floor. A soft breeze made the wooden sign, the W room, where we return to ourselves, tremble lightly. The faint chime blended with my heartbeat, steady, peaceful, free. I smiled. Life may have taken a lot, a husband, a son, trust, but it cannot take the will to live true to myself. I understand now freedom isn't going far away. Freedom is staying without fear. I closed the journal and looked at the group photo on the wall. Beatrice tending plants, Joan beaming, Lila flashing a victory sign, Nora with hands folded in prayer. And me sitting among them, silver hair bright in the sun, mouth curved in a smile, not for anyone else, but because I am truly living. Quietly I said, Gil, you taught me to love, but you didn't teach me how to love myself. Now I know. Light slipped through the window, falling across his frame, an answer without words. On a morning like any other, I sat to write, poured tea, and listened to footsteps in the hall. I once believed that when my own story ended, everything would stay calm forever. It didn't. Life has no period, only a change in key, like a song moving into its chorus. And I know the W room will go on with new people, new stories, and new knocks. 3 knocks, small but enough to brighten a long night. Thank you for staying with me until now. If you're still listening, maybe your heart has a wound too small, but enough to keep you quiet for a long time. I hope this story reminds you, you're not weak because you once trusted. You're strong because you chose to stand up. I truly want to know, what city are you listening from? And if there was a moment that made your throat tighten, write me a line. Not to lament, but so we know that at any age, we can still find one another through kindness. If this story helped you believe a little more in the strength of older people, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your note. Every comment you write can be a small light in the night, guiding someone who's lost, like those who once knocked 3 times at the door of the W room.
Don't step inside. Get out of here now. Rosa, the housekeeper, rushed toward me and grabbed my arm just as I set foot on my daughter's front steps. Her face had gone pale, as if she'd just seen death itself. I froze, my heart pounding, unable to understand what was happening in the very house I had once helped my daughter pay half the mortgage for. I opened my mouth to ask, but she backed away, glancing toward the door as though terrified someone might hear. If you stay here one more minute, you won't have a chance to walk out of this place. I stepped back toward my car, but instead of leaving, I turned off the lights, lowered my seat, and watched. And then, what I saw through the dining room window made everything inside me collapse. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Caroline Mercer, and I'm 57 years old. Just a few hours before hearing that terrifying warning, I had believed today would be the best day I'd had in an entire year. A long, agonizing year of silence, unanswered calls, messages slipping into the void like pain tossed into a dark sky. It all began with a text message, one short line that shattered every bit of emotional armor I'd built over the past year. "Mom, can we have dinner together next Thursday? I miss you." Grace, my only daughter, the child who used to hug me every night, who once said I was the best friend in the world, who cried when she left for college, yet suddenly disappeared from my life one day as if I had never existed. No argument, no clear reason, just distance widening day after day, unread messages, declined calls. Layer after layer, my daughter slowly slipped from my hands into a world I could no longer reach. A world where Landon Reeves, her husband, controlled every door. And yet that day, my phone buzzed, and with one message, all the pain and hope rushed back into me in the cruelest way. I read that message dozens of times, each time my heart beat harder. I told myself, maybe she really misses me. Maybe she finally realized her mother never did anything wrong. Maybe everything can start over. So I prepared. Too much, honestly, for an ordinary dinner. I changed clothes 5 times, checked the mirror a dozen more. I decided to wear the light blue sweater Grace gave me 3 years ago. The last Christmas, we were truly mother and daughter. Driving into Grace's upscale neighborhood, Snow Pine Estates on the outskirts of Denver, my heart fluttered like a woman on her first date in decades. But the moment I parked, I sensed something was off. The front yard was bare, no longer filled with the hydrangeas we planted together when Grace first moved in. The porch light was dimmer than usual. There was no sense of home, no warmth at all, only a cold emptiness like a frozen lake. I stepped out of the car, smoothed my wind-tousled hair, and took a deep breath to steady myself. I was about to attend our first reconciliation dinner after a year of estrangement. I had rehearsed a simple line for days. "Grace, I'm glad you texted me." But before I could use it, Rosa came running. Her sudden yank nearly knocked me off balance. Her face was flushed, her breathing uneven. I had never seen her like this. Rosa was always calm, gentle, someone who cared for Grace as if she were her own child. What she said wasn't just a warning. It was a plea. When she rushed back inside, her shoulders shaking as though afraid of being seen, a cold shiver ran the length of my spine. I returned to my car, shut the door, and locked it. But instead of driving away, I turned off all the lights, slid low in my seat, and peered through the narrow gap where the curtains didn't cover the window. At first, nothing. The house was dark, unnervingly still. But then, almost as if someone had waited for me to leave, lights flickered on room by room. Each window lit up like the opening scene of a carefully staged play. A man in a black suit appeared in the dining room, then a woman holding a folder, and then Landon walked in. One glance was enough to recognize that arrogant stride. He talked on the phone, pacing like he was leading a strategic briefing. But the cruelest part had yet to come. Grace stepped inside moments later. My daughter, her face unrecognizable. No smile, no warmth, only a chilling emptiness. She looked at the stack of papers on the table and signed them. No hesitation, no doubt. My heart clenched painfully. A year of absolute silence from her, no explanation. And now, signing documents? For whom? For what purpose? Was I dreaming? I leaned forward against the steering wheel, fighting the urge to sob. A familiar instinct suddenly surged back, one I thought I had buried long ago. The instinct of someone who spent 15 years living inside a violent marriage. Someone who had learned to sense danger the moment it entered the room. That instinct was screaming inside my head now. This wasn't a reconciliation dinner. This wasn't a daughter reaching out. This wasn't healing. This was a plan, a private meeting. And strangely, it had only started once I supposedly left, but I hadn't left. I was still there, and Landon looked straight toward me. I ducked down reflexively, my heart pounding like a drum. When I glanced again seconds later, the curtains had been pulled shut. The house vanished behind thick gray fabric, as if they knew I was seeing something I wasn't meant to see. I couldn't sit there anymore. I started the engine and drove away, my hands trembling so hard I struggled to keep the wheel steady. But leaving that house didn't bring relief. If anything, as the streetlights blurred into streaks of white outside my window, I realized I had just stepped into the biggest storm of my life. And one question stabbed through my mind over and over: was Grace being coerced? Or was my own daughter silently participating in a scheme against me? I drove away from Grace's neighborhood in a daze, as if everything I had just witnessed were a nightmare that hadn't finished unfolding. It wasn't until the glow of a gas station appeared on the right that I finally pulled in. I parked, lowered the window to let the night air in, hoping it would loosen the tightness in my chest. The smell of gasoline, the hiss of automated doors, the harsh white lights, all painfully ordinary. Meanwhile, I was shaking, trying to piece together what I'd just seen into something that made sense. I placed both hands on the wheel, but they wouldn't stop trembling. The air in the car felt heavy, almost suffocating. I tried recalling Grace's expression as she signed those papers. Cold, hollow. Not the face of the daughter I raised for more than 20 years. Not the child who once gave me a Mother's Day card with trembling handwriting. Mom, you are my safe place. Tears threatened, but my throat locked tight. My phone lit up. A message from an unknown number. It's me, Rosa. Don't go back to the house. Don't tell anyone. Meet me tomorrow at noon at the cafe inside the central station. Important. The word important sent a chill through me. I read it again, then tucked my phone inside the chest pocket of my jacket, afraid it might vanish if I put it anywhere else. Driving home, every street sign, every familiar corner felt strangely distant. I unlocked my apartment, stepped into my quiet living room, yet the unease followed me inside like a shadow. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my armchair by the window, staring at the city lights. Skyscrapers glowing gold, cars moving slowly along the freeway, lives continuing as usual while mine felt like it had been yanked off its axis. I imagined countless scenarios, Grace being pressured, Grace being deceived, or Grace truly believing the things Landon had told her. That possibility hurt more than my divorce ever did. I could recognize violence. I could fight against lies. But my own daughter believing I was toxic, that was a wound with no bandage. I remembered her freshman year of college, a whole week without calling. When I visited unannounced, she hugged me and cried from academic stress. A simple touch from me eased her breathing. But after she married Landon, everything changed. At first, subtly, vague excuses Grace made. We're busy. It's not a good time to talk. I'm just living my own life, Mom. I didn't realize it then, but each line was a step away from me. The day Grace got married, she looked beautiful, glowing, and Landon never let go of her waist, gripping her like he owned her. I didn't like that hand from the start. It was too tight, too possessive. But I told myself, Caroline, don't judge. He's the man your daughter loves. A year later, Grace was visibly thinner. Her close friends drifted away. My calls grew shorter, whispers from her that she was tired, that she was fine, and don't worry. But her voice said otherwise. Now looking back, every sign was painfully obvious. The next day, I met Rosa at the Central Bus Station Cafe, a crowded place where no one noticed anyone else. I arrived 20 minutes early, sitting near the window watching people hurry by. My hands wrapped around a cup of coffee I couldn't drink. Rosa arrived exactly at noon. She wore a knit hat and a dark scarf, her small frame tense as her eyes darted around the room. When she spotted me, her shoulders sagged with relief. She sat down and took my hands. "Mrs. Mercer, I'm so sorry I didn't speak sooner." I didn't have time to respond before she lowered her voice, scanning the room again. "Mr. Landon controls everything, every meal, every call, every person Grace is allowed to meet, even what she thinks." My eyes widened. Rosa explained it piece by piece. How Landon dictated Grace's diet, forcing her to stay on harsh regimens though she was already slim. How he checked her phone every morning. How he insisted she sleep 8 hours, not for her health, but to keep her from seeing anyone. And worst of all, he convinced her you're the problem, that you want to ruin their life, that you're jealous. I clenched my fist, trying to keep my voice steady, though my chest felt like it was being beaten from the inside. Grace believes that? Rosa looked down. She doesn't know what to believe anymore. Everything she hears comes from one person. A long, uncomfortable silence followed. I heard rolling suitcases, loudspeaker announcements, a crying child, all muffled, like they belonged to a world far from mine. Then Rosa said the words that shattered me. "He needs your signature. For the old house. For the shares her father left her. He said once he gets your signature, everything will be done." The room tilted. I gripped the table so I wouldn't fall. But Rosa wasn't finished. Her voice shook now. "Yesterday, I overheard them. That dinner wasn't about reconciliation. They planned to create an accident so you wouldn't be able to interfere." I looked into Rosa's frightened eyes, and all I could think about was Grace. Grace, my daughter. Grace, the child who held my hand on the first day of school. Grace, who once believed no one loved her more than her mother. Did she know? Was she being coerced? Or had she been manipulated into believing my death would make her life easier? I couldn't breathe. I had to inhale deeply 3 times just to stop myself from crying out in pain. The room blurred like someone had splashed water across a painting. One thing became painfully clear. If I didn't act, I would lose my daughter. Forever. Rosa opened her bag and pulled out a thick envelope wrapped in 2 layers of paper. Her hands trembled as she placed it on the table. I opened it, and the first thing I saw was a stack of documents bearing my signature. My signature, but not mine. The loops were too long. The ending stroke dragged out. One glance, and I knew they were forged. "There are also ones with Miss Grace's," Rosa whispered. I turned the pages. Grace's signatures looked disturbingly real. But I knew my daughter's handwriting. She always tilted the G slightly upward, writing quickly and neatly. These signatures were slow, cautious, copied strokes. A small audio recorder slid out of the envelope. I pressed play, my hand gripping the table. Landon's voice, low, calculated. "All we need is her signature. Grace's mother won't question anything if it all looks natural." We can't let her get in the way." Rosa swallowed hard. I heard it while taking the trash out behind the yard. I couldn't speak anymore. Not because I was shocked, but because I was holding myself together so I wouldn't fall apart in public. Part of me wanted to run, grab Grace, and drag her away from that man. But the part of me that survived 15 years of abuse knew impulsiveness would only make us both targets. "We could take this to the police," Rosa whispered, almost pleading. I met her eyes. "We can't. Not yet." Landon had wide connections in the city. He wasn't famous, but his father had once been chairman of the local Chamber of Commerce, a man with significant influence. A formal report could be diluted or, worse, turned into evidence against me. If I handed over what Rosa gave me to the police right now, there was a high chance I'd be labeled as a family disruptor before anyone bothered to look at the truth. I needed someone I could trust, and only one name came to mind: Harold Bishop, an old friend from college, now an attorney specializing in asset disputes and fraud. Harold was a quiet, straightforward man, and most importantly, he had no ties whatsoever to Landon's family. Right there in the cafe, I called Harold. His voice came through after 2 rings. "Caroline, it's been years. Are you all right?" "No, Harold, I think I'm in danger." The moment I said it out loud, my throat tightened. I had never spoken those words before. And once I did, the fear stopped being hypothetical and became real. I briefly explained what Rosa had revealed. Harold fell silent for a long moment, the only sound being the rustle of papers in his office. Then he said, "Listen to me carefully. Your old documents, the ones related to your previous home and the shares your late husband left, where are they?" "In a green folder, inside the safe under my desk." Harold lowered his voice, so serious it sent a shiver through me. "That is the only evidence protecting you right now. And Caroline, do not go home alone. I'm coming to meet you. Do not hang up." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. After we ended the call, I thanked Rosa and told her to go home using different routes to avoid anyone tracing our meeting. I left the central station feeling as if I were walking between 2 worlds. The world I once knew, peaceful, stable, and the world of shadows slowly swallowing me. By the time my car stopped in front of my apartment, Harold was already there waiting. But he wasn't standing normally. He was pressed against the doorframe, staring at me with a face nearly drained of color. "Caroline, your apartment was ransacked." My knees nearly gave out. We walked in together. The door hadn't been forced. Someone had either used a key or knew how to work the smart lock without leaving a trace. Inside was a scene I never imagined I would witness in my own life. The safe under my desk was wide open, drawers pulled out, papers scattered as if someone had been searching for something valuable. But the only thing missing was the green folder. I held my head in my hands, standing in the middle of the wrecked living room. Harold handed me a glass of water, speaking in a calming voice. "You need to stay composed. Someone knew you kept those documents, but they don't know I made partial copies earlier. I'll send them to you immediately." I stared at him, stunned. How did they know? Harold didn't hesitate. Grace didn't tell him, but Landon could guess. He's smart enough to understand that you would always hold on to evidence related to your and your daughter's assets. I barely had time to process his words when my phone rang. It was the library where I worked part-time. "Ms. Mercer, we just received an anonymous report accusing you of financial misconduct while overseeing the library's donation fund." My legs went weak. I almost dropped the phone. I've never done that," I stammered. "We know, but by policy, we must place you on temporary suspension while we investigate." I hung up and looked at Harold with a face drained of expression. "Caroline," he said slowly, "they're building a narrative that you are unstable, greedy, and dishonest. By the time you report them, no one will believe you." I couldn't find words. I felt myself being pushed into a corner by an invisible but powerful hand. Landon's hand. The phone buzzed again. A message from Rosa. They mentioned Plan B. It's not just about the assets. It's about Grace. My head felt like it exploded. I read it over and over, each word cutting into my skin. Plan B, not me, but Grace. I looked at Harold, my voice trembling uncontrollably. Where do they plan to take Grace? Harold looked at me carefully, choosing his words. "Caroline, I've heard Landon has financial dealings with an overseas partner. If he gets Grace out of the country before you act, we won't be able to find her again." The room spun. My breathing seized. On one hand, I knew that if I stayed involved, my life could be in danger. On the other hand, if I did nothing, Grace would disappear from my life forever. In that moment, I knew I had only two choices: run to save myself or fight, even if it meant risking everything. I closed my eyes for a few seconds, then opened them with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I had survived domestic violence. I had rebuilt my life from nothing. I was not giving up this time, not when my daughter was being swallowed by darkness. I left my ransacked apartment that very night without packing clothes or taking anything familiar. Harold told me to drive straight to my cousin's house in the Santa Fe area, a remote place, quiet, and most importantly, unknown to anyone connected to Landon. As I drove, the low mountain ranges appeared under the pale moonlight, stretching like a fragile curtain between me and the world Landon was trying to control. When I arrived, my cousin Sylvia's small wooden house stood beneath an old birch tree. The warm porch light nearly brought me to tears. I had grown used to feeling hunted, but being greeted by someone, even a distant relative, reminded me I still had places where I belonged. Sylvia looked me over and asked just one gentle question. "How long?" "A few days," I said softly. "Maybe longer." She nodded immediately, as if she had always expected something like this. "You're safe here. Rest. Talk tomorrow." But I knew I couldn't sleep. After a bowl of warm soup, I sat alone at the small wooden table by the window, replaying the audio files and examining each forged document Rosa had given me. Signatures, fake transfers, carefully fabricated records so precise they made my skin crawl. In that quiet Santa Fe room, I finally saw the situation from enough distance to understand that this wasn't just a broken family matter. It was an orchestrated plan, structured and deliberate, crafted by a man skilled in manipulation. The next morning, Harold arrived in Santa Fe. With him were two people he said would become critical allies: Troy Callahan, a retired detective who had handled domestic abuse cases, and Dr. Evelyn Moore, a specialist in coercive control and trauma bonding. From the moment I saw them, I knew I was no longer facing this storm alone. Troy entered with the presence of a man who had seen far too much darkness, but still carried compassion in his eyes. He didn't shake my hand. He simply looked at me and said, "Mrs. Mercer, I've heard everything, and I want you to understand something right now. You're not imagining this. It's real." That sentence alone eased half my burden. Evelyn was different, gentle, grounded, with eyes that seemed to read through every defense. When I described how Grace changed, her weight loss, her fear of answering the phone, her avoidance of friends, her constant anxiety, Evelyn nodded as if hearing a familiar story. That's coercive control, she explained. Not physical abuse, but far more damaging. The victim loses willpower, loses the ability to distinguish truth from manipulation, and becomes completely dependent on the abuser. I clenched my hands. But Grace is smart. She's been strong since she was little. Evelyn placed her hand on the table and said firmly, "Intelligence doesn't shield anyone from a skilled manipulator. In fact, intelligent people are often targeted because they know how to endure, rationalize, and silence their own doubts." A heavy silence filled the room. Troy stood up, arms crossed. "If Landon is preparing to take Grace out of the country, we don't have much time." I looked at him. "What do you mean?" "If he crosses a border with her, no one can demand extradition. Without evidence, without legal jurisdiction, she'll disappear from the United States and from your life." I felt myself turn to stone. I had feared it, but hearing it aloud made it undeniable. Harold spread a map on the table. "We need a plan. We can't wait for him to move first." I looked at these three people, strangers technically, giving their time, expertise, and safety for me and for a young woman they'd never met. Gratitude nearly overwhelmed me. Troy outlined the plan. His only weak point is his work schedule. Landon travels once a month. If we know his next trip, we get a window of a few hours. The only time Grace won't be monitored closely. I remembered Rosa's words. "He's flying to Phoenix next week. Board meeting." Troy circled the date. "Good. That's when we move." But the tasks ahead were daunting. Rosa would monitor the inside and alert us when Landon left. Harold would handle legal preparation and federal contact if needed. Troy would secure the home and guide the extraction. Evelyn would make first contact with Grace, easing her panic and helping her see the truth. When Evelyn described her role, I asked, "Will Grace trust you?" Evelyn gave a sad, soft smile. "Trust isn't required. What matters is breaking the mental loop he built. A few minutes without him in the room can create an opening." On paper, the plan looked simple. In reality, we all knew one mistake could ruin everything. I swallowed hard. What if we fail? Troy didn't hesitate. Failure isn't an option. We're rescuing someone trapped in a violent dynamic. We won't let anyone get dragged out of this country like property. Harold placed a hand on my shoulder. "Caroline, when we step in, we're not just helping you. We're saving a life." That sentence made my knees weak. Grace, my baby, the child I held in my arms when she was 3 days old, now needed a rescue like a hostage. Evelyn looked at me. "Prepare yourself emotionally. When we find Grace, she might resist. She might blame you or deny everything. That's normal when a victim is separated from their controller." I inhaled deeply. As long as she's alive, I can endure anything. After they left to prepare, I remained on Sylvia's porch, watching the Santa Fe sky dim behind the hills. The air was peaceful, yet I felt the weight of how narrowly I stood between saving my daughter and losing her forever. That night, Sylvia placed a warm hand on my shoulder. "Don't fall apart, Carolyn. I know you. You don't give up." Later, I stepped outside into the cold night air. The wind smelled faintly of distant snow. I looked toward Denver, toward Grace, and whispered into the dark, "Grace, I'm coming. Don't be afraid. Don't let go. I will get you out of there, whatever it takes." And just like that, the countdown to the biggest battle of my life began. Rosa messaged exactly as promised. "He's gone. 11:02. Took luggage. House alarm disabled. Now or never." I stared at the message, my hands cold as metal in winter. In the driver's seat, Troy gave a single nod, sharp, decisive, then looked back at Harold and Evelyn. Everyone was ready. Only I had to steady my breath. We parked 3 houses away from the gated entrance. From there, the steel fence, guard booth, and cameras of North Ridge Estates looked like the front of a fortress. But Troy knew how to neutralize intimidation. He put on a UPS delivery uniform Harold had prepared, plus a cap pulled low. He held an empty cardboard box labeled fragile. 15 years in law enforcement had taught him one thing. Sometimes the best way into a secure place was to look utterly harmless. "Stay calm," Troy whispered before stepping out. "We get one chance, but don't worry, I've gotten into places much harder than this." He walked to the gate. The camera scanned him. The guard glanced at the box, pressed a button, and opened the gate as if on autopilot. No questions asked. The gate opened, and the plan began. Troy walked deeper into the neighborhood, and our car followed the internal route unnoticed. Approaching the 3rd house on the right, Grace's, we slowed, stopping under a large tree that hid us from the entrance cameras. As promised, Rosa had left the back door slightly ajar. The curtain flickered gently in the breeze, like a silent plea. When we stepped inside, I sensed immediately the wrong kind of quiet. Not the peace of an empty home, but the heavy silence of a place where life had been stripped away and replaced with control. Nothing was out of place. Not a cushion. Not a single item left casually on a table. No smell of food, no background TV noise. Nothing indicating that Grace had been allowed to live as a normal human being. Rosa emerged from the hallway, pale and signaling us to stay silent. "She's in the living room. Her spirit is almost gone." We walked toward the living room doorway. I stepped in first, and my heart nearly dropped to the floor. Grace curled up on the sofa, wrapped in a thin blanket even though the house was warm. Her once soft hair was tangled and flat, as if life had drained out of it. Her cheeks were hollow, her eyes sunken and vacant. My daughter, who used to love jogging every morning, who used to smile brightly after yoga class, now looked as if she had survived a storm that had lasted an entire year. I stepped inside. "Grace?" She lifted her head, and panic flooded her eyes instantly. "Mom, you can't be here!" Her voice cracked like shattering glass. "If he finds out, you have to leave now. You don't understand. You can't be here." I didn't even have time to speak before Evelyn stepped forward softly, her voice like a gentle cloth draped over Grace's terror. "Grace, I'm Evelyn. No one is here to cause trouble. We're here to help, to protect you." Grace looked around, her eyes darting between us, as if desperately trying to decide who was a threat. It was the look of someone who had been controlled for so long that she no longer knew how to distinguish safety from danger. I sat down 2 steps away from her, not any closer. Evelyn said Grace needed space, not pressure. I gently took out my phone and opened the message I had received the day before. The message she sent, inviting me to dinner. "Grace," I said, showing her the screen, "this message, did you actually write it?" She stared at the screen, squinting, then slowly shook her head, not to deny me, but as if trying to remember something. "I didn't write this." Her voice was so soft I had to lean in to hear it. That single sentence made my heart tighten. Harold continued. He opened his briefcase and took out the photos Rosa had captured, the forged transfer documents with fake signatures of me and Grace. "If you had signed these, you would remember," Harold said as gently as possible. "But this signature isn't yours." And then I saw what I feared most, and also what I hoped for most. Grace's hand began to tremble. Not from anger, not from resenting me, but from fear and from realizing something was wrong. No, that's impossible, Grace whispered, her voice cracking with exhaustion. Rosa slowly stepped forward from behind the door, her eyes filled with pain as she looked at Grace. Ms. Grace, I heard him talking about an accident for your mother, a fall down the stairs, red wine, something that would look natural. Grace jerked her head up. No, he wouldn't, he's not like that. The word shot out like a spring, reflexively defending Landon, but her eyes no longer matched her voice. I looked straight at my daughter. I didn't accuse her. I didn't judge her. I simply asked, with all the ache inside me, Grace, do you trust him more than your own mother? A simple question, but enough to create the first crack in the wall Landon had built around her mind. Grace grabbed her head as if our words were fighting inside her skull. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice a soft thread wrapping around Grace's frayed spirit. What you're feeling right now, confusion, fear, not knowing who to trust, it's the clearest sign of psychological control. When you stop trusting yourself, when you stop trusting your own memories, it's because someone has taken that away from you. Tears began to fall down Grace's cheeks, first slowly, then all at once, like a dam breaking. I thought he loved me, she choked out. I thought he wanted what was best for me. I couldn't stay back anymore. I took one step toward her, each step feeling like walking through fire. Grace, I once believed the same thing about your father. My voice shook, and it took me years to escape. Grace looked up at me, really looked, for the first time in months. Mom? Just one word, but inside it was confusion, hurt, realization, and despair. Harold set the forged documents on the table. Evelyn placed a comforting hand on Grace's shoulder. Rosa stood behind her, nodding, affirming everything Grace was terrified to admit. And then, the moment I had waited for over a year, finally came. Grace inhaled shakily, her eyes red but clearer now, no longer cloudy with fear. She looked at me, directly, without avoiding, without flinching. Her voice was hoarse but firm. Mom, I want to leave. No alarm blared, no door slammed, no sound intruded on that moment, just a mother and her daughter. And for the first time in a long, painful year, I saw light return to her eyes. And I knew this was only the first step, but it was the most important one. The step that brought my daughter back to herself. Troy checked his watch, then looked at me and Evelyn, his voice low but sharp. We have to go now. He's due for a check-in. If Landon calls and Grace doesn't answer, or if her voice sounds off, he'll turn around immediately. Grace flinched, clutching the blanket around her like a fragile shield. Her breathing sped up, her hands squeezed together until her knuckles went white. Fear had rooted so deeply in her body that just hearing Landon's name sent her trembling. Rosa rushed to the kitchen, grabbed the phone Landon forced Grace to carry 24/7. She powered it off, removed the SIM, and handed it to Troy. He uses tracking software, Rosa whispered. I'm not sure turning it off is enough, but at least he can't follow the signal. Troy nodded and slipped the SIM into his pocket. No trace left behind. Let's go. Everything happened in seconds, but to me it felt like a lifetime. I put a coat on Grace, held her hand, and guided her toward the back door. Every step felt like stepping onto thin ice. I feared the creak of a floorboard, the squeak of a hinge, even the whisper of the wind. Evelyn stayed close, her hand on Grace's back to steady her breath. When we reached the yard, Troy scanned the surroundings. The garden was washed in pale afternoon light. No movement, No suspicious sound, only Grace's shaky breathing and my pounding heart. "Go," he whispered. We crossed the yard, slipping through the side path toward the back alley. Harold's black SUV waited under the shade of a large tree, engine humming softly. I opened the back door and helped Grace in. She trembled so violently she clutched my shoulders and asked 3 times, "Is he coming? Does he know? Can he see us?" I stroked her hair. "No, sweetheart. We're leaving safely." But my own heart was racing just as fast. When Harold pressed the gas, the car rolled forward, pulling us away from the house where my daughter had lived in fear for months. Troy reclined slightly, watching the rearview mirror nonstop. By the time we approached the community gate, my pulse was a drum inside my throat. The guard stood in the road, phone in hand, his face tense. As we drove past, he spoke quickly into the phone. "Yes, I'm checking. Let me review the rear cameras." Harold accelerated just as the guard looked up. But because our license plate belonged to Harold's law firm, which frequently entered the community, he didn't question it. We passed through. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding, but relief lasted only 5 seconds. Rosa's phone rang. The piercing sound exploded inside the silent car. Rosa glanced at the screen, her lips paling. "It's him." No one spoke. Only the hum of the engine filled the space. Rosa answered, switching to low speaker mode as planned. "Yes, sir? I'm at the market. Is something—" Landon's scream was so loud I flinched. "Someone broke into the house! The back door was unlocked! What are you hiding? Where's Grace?" Grace clamped her hands over her ears, curling into a tight ball. Troy motioned for Harold to go faster. Evelyn put her arm around Grace to keep her from collapsing. "Sir, I wasn't there. I just stepped out to shop," Rosa said, trembling. "Don't lie to me," he roared. "I'm coming back now. If anything has happened, you know the consequences." Rosa swallowed hard. "I don't know anything, sir." The call cut abruptly. No goodbye, no warning, just dead silence. In that moment, I understood one thing. We had won the first round, but he had just realized he'd lost control, and that would make him more dangerous than ever. Grace broke into sobs, not from relief, but from the panic triggered by his voice, a voice she had lived under for far too long. "He'll find me," Grace whispered. "He always finds me." I wrapped my arms around her, feeling her whole body shaking. "No, Grace, not anymore. You're going far away from him now." Troy turned toward the back seat, his voice firm. "You're safe. I promise. I've dealt with men like him, and I know how to stop them." But Evelyn added softly, not to frighten Grace, but to prepare me. "Caroline, I must tell you something. The period right after a victim escapes is the most dangerous phase. This is when the abuser has lost all control, and they become unpredictable. He could turn into a maniac. Very hard to anticipate." I squeezed Grace's hand tighter, my own heart clenching. "No matter what he does," I whispered into her hair, "I won't let him touch you again." We drove into the outskirts where the city faded into lonely hills and old wooden fences. After nearly an hour, Harold turned onto a dirt path leading to Troy's family ranch. "No one will find this place," Troy said. "No GPS, poor signal, no neighbors close enough to see anything. Only my family ever knew about it. And they're gone." The old wooden house appeared in the open field, its roof weathered, its porch overlooking distant mountains. It was peacefully quiet, almost too quiet. We stopped. No one moved for several seconds, as if all of us needed time to come down from the rush of escape. I helped Grace out of the car. The crisp air made her cough faintly. Then she looked around. her expression still frantic but no longer overwhelmed by panic. Evelyn rested a hand on my shoulder. "You just pulled your daughter out of the hands of a dangerous man, but the journey isn't over. This is Grace's most fragile stage, and the stage when he will be most desperate to pull her back." Troy checked the doors, locked every entry, drew the curtains, and shut off all lights that could be seen from outside. He moved with the precision of someone who had spent years keeping people alive. Grace sat on the old wool-covered sofa. I took her hand, cold, fragile, almost weightless. "Mom, do you think he'll come here?" she whispered. I kissed her hair, my voice breaking. "No, he won't find this place, and I won't let him come near you ever again." Grace finally cried, truly cried, for the first time since we'd entered her house earlier that day. No more automatic apologies for Landon, no more terrified whispers, just the sobs of someone who had finally stepped out of the invisible cage. I held her as our tears blended, and I vowed with everything left in me that I would protect her to the very end. I didn't know how many hours had passed since we reached Troy's ranch. The afternoon light had vanished. Darkness spread across the land, yet inside the wooden house, the warm glow of the lamps still couldn't calm the storm inside my daughter. Grace stood by the window, arms wrapped around herself, staring into the pitch-dark field as if Landon could emerge from it at any moment. She flinched at every noise, a branch scraping the roof, the wind squeezing through the cracks. Her whole body was strung tight, ready to snap. "I'm fine," she whispered, but her shaking legs betrayed her. Evelyn stepped close, gently placing her hand on Grace's back. "Breathe in slowly. Count to 4, then exhale gently." Grace followed the instructions, but her breath broke into weak, uneven fragments like a torn float barely clinging to the surface of the water. "I'm scared. He'll know I ran," she whispered, trembling. "He always knows. Everything. Mom, will he find me?" I stepped closer, placing my hand over her shaking one, gripping it just firmly enough to remind her she was still in the present, not trapped in that house where she had been held by invisible chains. "No one knows we're here," I said. "No one, except the people we trust completely." But Grace couldn't hear my words with her heart. She was still living inside the wound, inside the reflexes carved into her after years of control. Evelyn signaled for Troy to pull the curtains shut. The room became sealed off, safer. The warm light formed a small circle in the darkness, a circle where Grace could finally breathe without feeling watched. "Drink some water," Evelyn said gently. "Your body is reacting to long-term stress. Water will help you settle." Grace held the glass with both hands, sipping it the way someone leaving a desert would. After a few minutes, she sat on the sofa, curling into herself as though she were afraid of taking up too much space. Evelyn sat an appropriate distance away, not too close to pressure her, not too far to make her feel abandoned. "Grace," Evelyn began, her voice soft like a low piano note, "when was the last time you felt truly happy?" Grace was silent for a long time. I thought she wouldn't answer. Then suddenly, a sob rose from her chest. "It was before I married him." She spoke between choked breaths and tears spilled, as if that question had unlocked a door she had kept sealed for years. I felt something inside me fracture. Grace had never told me anything. She always smiled in the photos she sent, always said, "I'm fine," always reassured me, "Don't worry." But her smiles, it turned out, were only masks. Evelyn nodded gently, letting Grace walk toward the truth at her own pace. Back then, Grace swallowed her tears. I wanted a family. I thought He understood me. But after we married, everything changed. She wiped her cheeks, but the tears kept coming. He said I was fat, said I dressed like a child, said I didn't know how to talk. He checked my phone every night, said I didn't need friends, said I didn't need you. My heart clenched when she reached that last word. Evelyn asked softly, "When did you first realize you weren't free?" "When I wanted to visit Mom for her birthday." Grace lifted her swollen eyes. "He threw my car keys away and told me only an ungrateful woman runs around chasing other people on an important day." I believed him. I thought I was really awful. Harold, who had been quietly observing, spoke slowly, without judgment. "That's gaslighting, Grace. He made you believe every problem came from your imagination. That's how an abuser keeps control." Grace clenched her hands tightly. "I know. I changed. I wasn't myself anymore. But I didn't know how to get out." I knelt in front of her and lifted her hands. That's when I saw the faint purple bruise on her left wrist. Deep, unmistakable. "Grace." I froze. "Did he do this?" Grace immediately hid her hand, like someone trained to protect the person who harmed them. No. I did it myself." But her voice trembled, weak and ashamed. Troy, who had seen this too many times, shook his head. "You don't need to protect him here, Grace. We know where that mark came from." Grace broke into sobs, broken, abandoned, childlike cries. He only hit me when I talked back. Never where people could see, never hard, just to remind me how to behave." I wrapped my arms around her as my tears fell into her hair. "Oh my God, Grace. How did you endure all this without me knowing?" Evelyn placed a hand on my shoulder, not to stop my tears, but to steady me. "Caroline, you are not to blame. Men like Landon hide their violence well. They build a perfect image for the world and show their true face only behind closed doors. You could be the most loving, attentive mother, but you cannot see what they make sure you never see." Then Evelyn turned to Grace, her voice firm. "What happened to you is abuse, not love, not protection, not care, but control, erasing and breaking you." Grace sobbed, clutching her head. I think I've been brainwashed," she whispered. "Every thought in my head is his. I don't even know who I am anymore." Evelyn nodded, unsurprised. "That's something many survivors face, but you're doing the most important thing. You stepped out of that environment, and every passing minute, you are coming back to yourself, piece by piece." Grace rested her head on my shoulder, her eyes heavy. I stroked her hair, feeling her body slowly relax, for the first time since we'd found her. Within minutes, she drifted off to sleep, her breathing still shaky, but no longer terrified by every rustle outside. I looked at her thin, exhausted face, and a deep pain filled my chest, but there was also a tiny flicker, a flicker of hope. Because for the first time after years inside that dark box of control, Grace had stepped 1 foot out of it, and I would do anything to help her step out with the other. The second night at Troy's ranch carried an eerie stillness, a stillness that wasn't peaceful at all. It felt like a lake before a storm, unmoving, cold, and ready to shatter at the slightest tremor. Grace had fallen asleep early, drained after the emotional unraveling with Evelyn. But I, despite the burning in my eyes, couldn't close mine. I sat on the porch, staring at the darkness spreading across the hills, my heart tightening with the sense that things would get worse before they got better. And I was right. Near midnight, Troy received a message from someone in his old department. A guard from the gated community who saw Landon every day. He went to her cousin's house. yelled at the neighbors, showed photos. Troy, read it, then turned to me, his face darkening like the night swallowing the moonlight. I'm so sorry, Caroline. But he's reached Santa Fe. It felt like someone squeezed my chest with both hands. Is my sister okay? Yes, he didn't touch anyone, but he shouted, questioned neighbors, claimed you kidnapped an adult, that Grace is mentally unstable, showed them pictures of you both. And according to the guard, he looked completely unhinged. I closed my eyes, feeling myself sink into a cold abyss. Grace heard my shaky breath and sat up abruptly, still half asleep. Mom. What happened? Troy didn't hide it. He crouched down so she could see his face. Landon made it to Santa Fe, but everyone is safe. He's just hunting for clues. Grace clutched the blanket, her breathing fractured. He won't stop. Mom, I know him. He'll come here. Evelyn pulled her close, rubbing her back. We're prepared. Tomorrow, when the FBI office opens, we'll file everything. After that, he can't touch you. Tomorrow, Grace whispered, but there was no faith in her voice. That's tomorrow, but what about tonight? Tonight. Tonight was the word that silenced the whole room, because tonight no one knew where Landon was. No one knew how close he might be. No one knew if he had already found a trail. Troy stood, locking every door, pulling curtains tight, checking each window. He placed a heavy flashlight near the bed and took down his father's old hunting rifle from the wall. Just in case, he said, voice low, I pray we won't need it. The house grew thick with tension, a tension so sharp it felt like one wrong breath could break it. When Evelyn tucked Grace back into bed, I sat beside her, holding her hand as she drifted into uneasy sleep, jerking awake at the smallest noise. I held her hand as if letting go would make her disappear. Around 3 a.m, the hour humans are weakest, the hour fear becomes most real, I heard the first sound, a tiny one. But not the wind, not the wooden frame settling. It was the soft, unmistakable tap of someone touching glass. I shot upright, heart slamming into my ribs. I thought I imagined it, but then, crack! Glass shattered from the living room. I leapt to my feet. Grace, stay here, I shouted, running through the hallway. But Troy was already ahead of me, rifle in hand. Stay behind me, he barked. I ran anyway. I couldn't think of anything but Grace. Troy flipped on the living room light, and I saw him, Landon. He stood in the center of the room, his face twisted beyond recognition, his eyes bloodshot like someone who hadn't slept in days. His shirt was wrinkled, dirt smeared on his sleeves. He must have pushed through bushes or fences to break in. His expression wasn't human anymore. It was obsession, ownership, madness. When he saw me, only me, his eyes ignited. Caroline, he growled. Give me back my wife, or all of you will pay. Troy raised the gun. Don't move, one more step and I shoot. Landon laughed, a sound so cold it chilled my spine. You think you scare me? I didn't come alone. And at that moment, headlights blasted through the windows, harsh, blinding white. At least 2 cars. Figures stood behind the lights, silhouettes impossible to identify. Landon's eyes gleamed with mania. She belongs to me. I'm taking her, and none of you can stop me. I tried to run to the bedroom, but before I could, no, Mom. Grace stood in the hallway. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't hide behind me. She simply stood there, trembling but upright, facing the man who had shattered her spirit. Landon froze. Grace, sweetheart. His voice flipped instantly from deranged to sugary poison. "They lied to you. You don't understand. Just come back and we'll fix everything. You just need to sign a few things. I'm doing all of this for you." Grace inhaled deeply. Her voice shook, but it was clear. "No, I'm not going with you." The air in the house detonated. Landon roared, "You're mine! You promised you'd always stay with me! Evelyn stepped forward, calm as ice. "She's not your property." Troy tightened his grip on the trigger. Harold shielded Grace with his body, and I could only stare at my daughter, trembling but standing tall, facing the man who once held her mind in his hands. "Grace," Landon snarled, "you don't understand how dangerous this is. You only have to listen to me." "No," Grace said again, louder. "You're not someone who loves me. You're someone who wants to own me." I saw her knees weaken slightly, but she didn't fall. Grace was fighting the thing that had controlled her every day, and she was winning, even if just barely. Landon screamed, his voice slicing through the room. "If you don't come with me, then no one in this house is leaving alive." Troy immediately stepped forward. "Try it." Outside, the car lights shifted, and the shadows of the figures moved with them. Landon looked toward the window, then back at us, like a cornered animal. And I knew. This confrontation was only the beginning. One wrong move, and there would be blood. I held Grace's hand from behind, gripping it tightly, as if trying to give her strength I wasn't even sure I still had. The standoff among the three of us, me, my daughter, and the man who once controlled her life, had gone past the point of return. And I understood that tonight could determine the fate of my entire family. I had never known a moment that could feel both endless and as brief as a single breath, until the police burst into the ranch house in the middle of our confrontation with Landon. Everything happened too fast. Flashlight beams cutting through the windows, heavy footsteps on the ground, and shouts of "Police! Open up!" echoing through the cramped space. Troy didn't even have time to speak before the door flew open. 3 fully equipped officers stepped inside, one holding a flashlight, another raising a hand in a controlling gesture. They swept the light across the living room and stopped when they saw Landon standing close to Grace and me. "Hands down and step back," one officer shouted. But Landon, instead of fear, his face changed instantly. His voice turned soft as silk, dripping with the kind of deceit I had known all too well. "Thank God you're here." He pointed straight at me. "She kidnapped my wife. Grace is in an unstable mental state. I'm afraid she might harm herself." My heart clenched, as if someone had crushed it with their fist. All week I had prepared myself for countless possibilities, but not this. Landon had made the move before we did. He called the police, and he had already scripted the entire story. An officer turned to me. "Are you Caroline Mercer?" I nodded, trying to keep my voice steady even though my legs were shaking. "We received a report that you forcibly detained an adult against her will and caused her emotional distress." I opened my mouth to explain, but Landon immediately cut in, as if he had memorized his lines. "She's been manipulating her daughter, filling her head with lies that I'm hurting her. I have medical records proving Grace has had episodes of instability. I'm only here to take her home." I felt frozen. Harold stepped forward but was blocked by an officer. Evelyn squeezed my hand gently, reminding me not to react emotionally. But in that moment, Landon's wall of lies seemed as tall as a mountain, while my truth felt like a petal caught in the wind. An officer turned to Grace. "Miss Grace, do you want to leave with your husband?" Grace didn't move. Just hours ago, she had trembled at the sound of his name. Now that question pierced right into her deepest fear. Landon took one step, pretending to care about her. "Come on, sweetheart, come home with me. Everything will be okay." Grace stepped back, only slightly, but enough to make Landon stiffen. "Ms. Grace," the officer repeated, "are you being held here against your will?" The air thickened. I felt the whole room tilt. If Grace didn't speak, the police would believe Landon. He had a story, fake documents, and that polished, gentle exterior he had cultivated for years. My knees almost buckled when I saw Grace lower her head, her shoulders shaking. "Grace," I whispered softly, not begging, not pushing, just calling my daughter the way I did when she was little, when she needed to know her mother was still there. Grace lifted her head. Her eyes were swollen and red, but no longer empty. Something inside her had shifted. A small, bright piece of courage strong enough to push back against the darkness that had swallowed her for 2 years. And in a voice weak but clear, Grace said, "I want to file a report." No one moved for several seconds. Even the officers were stunned. Landon let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Grace, you're being coerced." Grace raised her hand, stopping him. "I am not kidnapped. I left because I was threatened. I want to file a report for abuse." An officer stepped closer. "Do you have any evidence?" Grace looked at me. I nodded. "Go ahead, sweetheart. The truth has been waiting to be spoken." Grace opened the cloth bag Rosa had given her. Her hands still trembled, but she placed each item on the table, like she was laying down the foundation of her freedom. This is the audio recording, where he talks about creating an accident for my mother. These are photos of property documents with forged signatures of me and my mom. This is a message I never sent, but has my name on it. The officers leaned in. Their expressions shifted from suspicion to confusion to realization. Harold added gently, "All of these are time-stamped properly. We'll provide full originals first thing in the morning." Grace still wasn't done. She pulled up her sleeve. Bruises, the deep purple marks Landon had left, were exposed under the light. One officer murmured, "My God." Those bruises, they needed no explanation. They spoke every truth Grace had been forced to swallow. Landon's expression twisted. He stepped back, his mouth opening as if scrambling for excuses. She did that herself. But no one believed him anymore. An officer looked at him, cold as steel. "Landon Whitmore, you're coming with us for questioning." Landon snapped. He lunged at Grace. "You belong to me. You can't." Troy rushed forward, but the officers were faster. They pinned Landon to the floor, twisting his arms behind him as he screamed, "Grace, you'll pay for this! All of you will!" The click of the handcuffs echoed sharply, a cold, final sound, enough to make Grace burst into tears. The police let him out. The flashing lights from the patrol car cut across the wooden walls, glinting off the tears on Grace's face like broken moonlight. When the door shut, when the engines faded, when silence returned, Grace collapsed in front of me. I thought I was going to die in that house," she whispered, each word rising from years of swallowed fear. "Mom, if you hadn't come, I don't think I'd still be alive." I pulled her into my arms, holding her as tightly as I could, wishing I could mend every wound she had endured in the darkness. "No, sweetheart," I said, my voice breaking. "You survived. You did. You're stronger than you think." Evelyn stepped beside us and placed a hand on Grace's shoulder. "This is the first step, and it's the hardest one." Grace held my hand, and for the first time, it didn't tremble. In that moment, I knew that my daughter, the girl I thought I had lost to control, fear, and lies, was finding her way back. Not because of a miracle, but because she had reclaimed something that had been stolen from her. Her voice. I once believed that the moment the police handcuffed Landon and took him out of the ranch would be the end of that nightmare. But as Harold had warned earlier, justice doesn't come overnight, Caroline. Especially when the enemy is someone who knows how to hide his crimes and manipulate emotions. And he was right. Just 3 days after the break-in, Landon's lawyer filed for bail. I wanted to object, to scream that he would continue threatening us. But the legal system doesn't run on emotions. It runs on procedure. He was granted bail with conditions, a substantial bond and a restraining order. Grace panicked when she heard. "He'll find me," she whispered, trembling, and I held her close, listening to her heartbeat pounding in terror. Troy reassured her. "He made a critical mistake breaking in. Our case is solid. The moment he violates the restraining order, he's back in jail." But fear doesn't disappear because someone says so. It needs time. And Grace needed more time than anyone could imagine. In the following days, we left the ranch. Not by choice, but out of necessity. We chose Portland, far enough, quiet enough, and full of support services for survivors of domestic abuse. When the car passed the Welcome to Portland sign, I glanced at Grace. She sat by the window, her eyes still darkened with exhaustion, but her face looked less tense, as if she had walked out of a long tunnel, and this was the first light she had seen in years. Evelyn moved to Portland a few weeks later to continue therapy. I knew that wasn't something every doctor would do, and I was deeply grateful. The first session took place in our small living room, sunlight pouring onto Grace's face, highlighting the faint bruises still lingering. "How are you feeling today?" Evelyn asked softly. Grace smiled, a small, fragile smile. "I don't know. Some days, I think I'm okay. But then I hear footsteps in the hallway and I can't breathe." Evelyn nodded. "That's trauma. Very common. You lived in fear too long. Your brain needs time to understand you're safe." Grace stared at her hands. "I feel guilty for trusting the wrong person, for leaving Mom, for not seeing the truth." I wanted to pull her into my arms and tell her nothing was her fault, but Evelyn held my gaze. This was something Grace needed to walk through herself. "Grace," Evelyn said, "victims of coercive control never know they're victims while they're in it. You weren't weak. You were isolated, made to doubt yourself. No one is strong enough to resist that alone." Grace lifted her eyes, tears falling freely for the first time without wiping them away. "I want to believe that." I held her hand. "You're not weak, Grace. You're a survivor." She broke into tears, not the terrified kind, but the relieved kind. While Grace healed, Harold kept digging. When he laid a thick stack of papers in front of me, my breath caught. "Caroline, this wasn't just about Grace." The file was packed with evidence of Landon's involvement in shady transfers, forged property documents, and hidden debts. Grace wasn't targeted because she was naive. She was targeted because she had legal value he wanted to exploit. "So that means," I whispered. "It means," Harold said gravely, "Grace wasn't foolish. She was systematically groomed." After he left, I stared out at Portland's gray sky. Light rain began to fall, and for the first time in months, I felt something lift off my chest. Grace hadn't failed. She had survived something designed to break her completely. In the weeks that followed, I saw her change, piece by piece. The first time she laughed at a cat video. The first time she went grocery shopping without checking behind her. The first time she finished a plate of pasta without worrying he would call her fat. The first time she slept 7 hours. Real sleep, not jolting awake from nightmares. And the first time she looked at me and smiled softly, "Mom, I think I'm going to be okay." I turned away so she wouldn't see my tears. I had once believed I'd lost her forever, swallowed by manipulation and fear. But truth remained where lies had tried to bury it. Maternal love doesn't disappear because someone hides it. It only gets covered, and slowly we brush the dust away. But while we healed, Landon kept making mistakes. He sent anonymous messages to Grace, called from unknown numbers, watched her from outside a therapy office. Even with the restraining order, he kept violating it. And that sent him back to jail. When the police informed us, Grace exhaled like she had dropped a stone she'd carried for years. I held her, whispering, "You don't have to be afraid anymore." But she and I knew fear doesn't evaporate instantly. It melts slowly, like ice under spring's sun, and someday it would be only a memory. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sunset turn the Willamette River red, Grace whispered, "Mom, if you hadn't come for me, I don't think I'd still be alive to see this sky." I squeezed her hand. "You saved yourself when you said no. I only walked beside you." She rested her head on my shoulder. "Mom, am I ready for the trial?" The wind brushed past us, carrying the scent of the river and the quiet of evening. I looked at the daughter who had once been shattered and was now slowly standing tall again, and I knew the final battle still awaited us. "Yes, sweetheart," I said. "We're ready." We didn't know how long the trial would last. We didn't know what Landon would try next. We didn't know where this would take our family. But we knew one thing. This would be the biggest battle, and the last one. On the first morning of the trial, Portland was wrapped in a thin layer of fog. The sky was gray without a hint of sunlight, but somehow it felt fitting for the moment we were about to face. The moment that would end years of manipulation, threats, and fear. Grace held my hand as we climbed the steps of the federal courthouse. Her hand still trembled, but it was no longer the desperate trembling from before. It was the trembling of someone about to walk into her final confrontation. One fought in public, before dozens of eyes, before the law, and before the man who once held her captive through invisible chains. Troy and Evelyn walked behind us. Harold waited at the entrance, holding the black case that contained all the evidence against Landon. "If justice had a face today," Harold said as he opened the door, "I believe it would be named Grace Mercer." Grace swallowed hard, took a deep breath, and nodded. The courtroom was large but suffocating. On the left sat our side, me, Grace, Harold, and our support team. On the right was Landon and his attorney. I looked at him. Landon appeared in his familiar gray suit, his tie straightened, his hair neatly slicked back. If someone didn't know the truth, anyone could believe he was a successful man here to resolve a small financial dispute. But I knew better than anyone that neatness was only a facade. He sat down at the defendant's table, looking around the courtroom as if this were his stage. And then, when his eyes landed on Grace, he gave a small smile. A smile that was arrogant, taunting, and chilling. Grace stiffened. I squeezed her hand tightly. "Don't look at him. Look at me." Grace turned to me, and in her eyes I saw both fear and determination. The hearing began. The judge, a silver-haired woman whose face suggested she had witnessed many family tragedies, asked each side to present their case. Landon's attorney stood first. His voice was smooth, practiced, and clearly rehearsed many times. Your Honor, my client is the victim of a long misunderstanding. His wife, Ms. Grace, has shown signs of mental instability over the past year. Her mother, Mrs. Carolyn, removed her from the home against her will, causing her to panic. Several bruises thought to be from abuse were actually self-inflicted due to emotional dysregulation. Grace bowed her head. I saw her shoulders tremble. But Evelyn gently touched her back. Breathe, Grace. You only need to inhale and exhale. When Harold rose, his voice was calm but razor sharp. Your Honor, we will begin with the financial evidence. He took out 3 thick folders, each marked with colored tabs. This is proof that Landon Whitmore forged transfer documents for 3 properties owned by Grace and her mother, with the intent to seize their assets. All signatures have been inspected and confirmed as fraudulent. He held up each page. The signatures were stretched unnaturally. The handwriting of Grace leaned too far to the right, clearly forged, but sophisticated enough to fool most people. Next, Harold played the audio recording, the one Rosa captured while eavesdropping behind the door as Landon talked about a fall down the stairs accident meant for me. The courtroom fell silent. The judge's brows knitted. Landon's attorney tried to interject. That could have been a joke. Try joking about getting rid of your mother-in-law in front of a judge, Harold replied, his voice so cold that the courtroom paused for several seconds. Then it was Grace's turn. Grace stood. I heard the soft scrape of the chair, a tiny sound, but loud enough to make me want to hold her all over again. She walked to the witness stand, each step heavy as if carrying a year's worth of fear with her. When she reached the stand, I could see her hands gripping the sides of the chair. Miss Grace, the judge asked, are you ready to testify? Grace nodded. Yes, I am. The first sentence wavered, but as she continued, her voice grew clearer, steadier. Landon is not the person he presents here. I lived with him for over 2 years, and in those 2 years, I went through cycles most people never see. It started with sweetness, with care. Then it turned into control. The whole room went silent. No whisper, no shifting of chairs. Grace swallowed hard and continued. He controlled what I ate, what I wore. He told me I was fat, made me diet until some nights I could barely stand. He took my phone every night, read every message, deleted my friends, forbade me from seeing my mother. Her voice caught. I placed a hand over my heart to keep it from exploding. Then came the punishments, Grace said, softer now. He never hit me where anyone could see, only in hidden places. He threatened me if I ever left the house. Then he apologized, brought gifts, and the cycle repeated again. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but this time she didn't wipe them away. Grace lifted her sleeve. The faint but undeniable bruises appeared under the courtroom lights. A sharp gasp came from someone behind us. Landon's attorney shot to his feet. Objection! Those bruises! Sit down, the judge said, her voice sharp as a blade. She is testifying. Grace forced herself to steady her voice. I thought the apologies would change things. I thought he loved me, but he only wanted to control me, seize my assets, eliminate my mother. I lived like someone who had no breath left. She looked at the judge, her voice suddenly strong enough to silence the room again. The day I ran. If my mother hadn't come for me, I don't think I would be alive to stand here today. That was the moment I lowered my head into my hands and let the tears fall. But I didn't sob, didn't tremble. They were not tears of pain anymore. but tears of someone who had just watched her child return from the edge of a cliff. The judge took a few notes. "Thank you, Miss Grace." Grace walked back to us. I stood, wrapped her in my arms, and felt her heartbeat against my chest. No longer the heartbeat of fear, but of someone who had reclaimed the right to live. When it was time for the verdict, no one in the courtroom held a shred of doubt. The judge read each charge clearly. Landon Whitmore is found guilty of large-scale financial fraud, forgery of legal documents, emotional domestic abuse, issuing threats to life, and violating a restraining order. I looked at him. The arrogance on his face had collapsed into a fear I had never seen in him before. Sentence: 17 years in federal prison with no eligibility for reduction during the first 8 years. His attorney rushed to say something, but Landon stood frozen, his face pale. I didn't look at him again. I looked at Grace. She walked out of the courtroom, her breathing unsteady but her eyes shining with something I hadn't seen in years: life. On the courthouse steps, the city wind blew through her hair. Grace lifted her face to the sky, tears rolling but her lips curved into a smile. "Mom," she whispered softly, "I feel like I was born again." I held my daughter tightly, pressing my face into the hair that had once been drenched in tears, but now smelled of freedom. "Not born again, Grace," I whispered. "You were born for real. This time into freedom, into light, into the truth you fought so bravely to reclaim." And in that moment, I knew our story had reached the end of its darkness, and the doorway to a new life had opened wide for both of us. 5 years have passed since the day the trial ended, since the day Grace walked out of those courthouse doors with tears streaming down her face, but with a heart that, for the first time, understood what freedom felt like. 5 years, not long in a lifetime, yet long enough to heal wounds I once feared would stay with her forever. Now every morning I wake up in our little house in North Seattle, open the window to breathe in the crisp air carrying the scent of young pine, and each time I do, I silently thank life for giving us another chance. Grace is the one who has changed the most. Now 34, she works at a support center for domestic abuse survivors. She didn't choose this job out of ambition, but out of gratitude. Grace once told me, "I don't want anyone to spend years realizing they deserve a different life." I watch her when she stands before groups of women who arrive with dark circles under their eyes, slumped shoulders, exhausted gazes. Grace doesn't lecture or preach. She simply tells her story, softly, like she's speaking to a friend, and that sincerity has saved countless lives. My own life changed in ways I never expected. After the trial, I opened a small bookstore on a quiet street near Green Lake. It isn't large, just 2 rooms with old wooden shelves and soft armchairs. But somehow it seems to hold an entire world. Sometimes I host gatherings about domestic abuse, inviting women who have lived stories like ours to sit together, drink tea, and speak of things they never dared to say out loud before. I'm not an expert or a therapist. I'm just a mother who once lost her daughter to darkness and was lucky enough to find her before it was too late. The bookstore gradually became a refuge for wounded souls. Some come just to listen. Some stay to rediscover themselves. Some silently place a book on the counter and cry. And all of them remind me of this simple truth. Surviving isn't just continuing to breathe. It's reclaiming your life after the storm has passed. Rosa lives near us as well. She, the woman who risked everything to warn me that night, has become an irreplaceable part of our family. We often joke that life stitched us into a chosen family, And sometimes, the family you choose becomes stronger than the one you're born into. Every weekend we cook together. Rosa always brings her cornbread that she proudly claims is better than the Mexican place down the street. Grace brings a vegetable salad Evelyn taught her to help rebuild healthy eating habits. And I make chicken soup, the dish Grace used to crave but never dared cook in the years she lived with Landon because the smell bothered him. Now we cook it every week as a small symbol of freedom. But healing isn't a straight path. There are nights when Grace jolts awake, sweat soaking her back, her eyes wide as if she were seeing him standing in that ranch house again. But instead of shrinking in fear, Grace calls my name. "Mom, where am I?" And I go to her, kneel by the bed, hold her hand, and say, "You're home. There's no one here." The nightmares have grown fewer with time. The panic spells shorter, and small things like laughing at a movie, slowing down to watch the sunset, or stepping into a clothing store without fearing judgment are quiet victories we celebrate in our own way. We built a new home, not out of wood and brick, but out of peace, respect, and love untouched by fear. A home with no stalking footsteps, no controlling gaze, no threats. Just 3 women, my daughter, Rosa, and me, walking out of the past and into a future on steadier legs. One evening on the balcony, watching the sun melt into the horizon, Grace rested her head on my shoulder. The orange glow on her face made her look like a completely new version of herself. Not the old Grace, not the shattered Grace, but the Grace of today, strong, grounded, and free. "Mom," she whispered, "the moment I escaped him, that was the moment I returned to you. I thought I lost you, but really, I lost myself." I held her hand, feeling like I was touching a life she had stitched back together with her own courage. "No, sweetheart," I said. "You never lost me. You were just wandering through a place that was too dark. I only did what mothers do. I went to find you." The sky that day glowed a breathtaking shade of gold. I knew our story had reached its end, not in sorrow, but in hope. The deepest wounds had finally begun to heal. I know I lost many things. The years Grace spent under manipulation, the empty nights without messages, the days wondering whether my daughter was alive in spirit or completely broken. But I also found everything again, my daughter, my family, and myself. And if there is one thing I want to offer anyone listening to our story, it's this. A mother will fight to her very last breath to pull her child out of the abyss. Not out of obligation, not out of duty, but because love never gives up. Thank you. Yes, you, for staying with me until the end of this story. Where are you watching from in America or anywhere in the world? I would love to hear your voice, feel your heart, and know whether our journey touched a corner of your own life. If you felt a pain like ours, please remember, you are not alone. You deserve peace. You deserve a love that does not hurt you. Share with me in the comments. Every story you tell could become a lifeline for someone still sinking in silence. And if you want to walk with me through more stories of healing, please subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave a like. Not just to support us, but to let me know there are hearts out there walking beside me as we keep lighting the way forward. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for your patience, your empathy, and for becoming part of the light that helped my daughter and me step out of the darkness. I hope to see you again on the next journey.